Derek Holloway pressed the barrel of his rifle against the trail camera, bolted to the pine, looked straight into the lens, and smiled like a man who had never been told no in his life. Then he fired. The camera exploded into plastic and wire, and his laughter carried across 700 acres of somebody else's land. He turned to his friends and said, "Tell the lady she can keep her signs. The mountain's ours." 14 miles away, a woman watched the footage go black and said nothing at all. Before we go further, please subscribe to the channel and stay with this story until the very end, because what happens on that mountain is not what anyone expects. And leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The bell over the door of Hutchins Hardware in Lodgepole, Montana rang at 7 minutes past 8 on a Tuesday morning in early September, and every man at the coffee counter turned around to look because nobody in that town had ever heard a truck they didn't recognize. She was maybe 5'7", dark hair pulled back tight, a canvas jacket that had been washed so many times the color had given up. She didn't look at anybody. She walked straight to the fencing aisle like she had a map of the place in her head. Earl Hutchins had run that store for 31 years, and he knew how to read a customer in about 4 seconds. Tourists touched everything. Ranchers touched nothing. Contractors went straight to what they needed and asked for the price. This woman didn't ask for the price. She just started stacking. 40 rolls of high-tensile wire, 600 T-posts, 2 post drivers, 11 boxes of galvanized staples, 4 cases of concrete mix. She stacked it all on a pallet jack. She found herself without asking anyone where it was. "Ma'am," Earl said, "you want me to get somebody to help you with that?" "No, thank you." "That's about, he was doing math and losing. "That's a lot of fence." "Yes." "Where you fencing?" She kept stacking. "The Vance place." The coffee counter went quiet, not polite quiet, the other kind. Earl set down the pen he'd been holding. "The Vance place," he repeated. "That's right. Old Ray Vance's 700 acres, up past the Blackfoot Cut." "Yes." Bill Tarrow, who was 74 years old and had opinions about everything, turned around on his stool. "Nobody's bought the Vance place, honey. That's been sitting 9 years. It sold 11 days ago." "To who?" She lifted a case of concrete mix onto the pallet like it weighed nothing. "To me." Earl looked at Bill. Bill looked at Earl. And that was the first minute the town of Lodgepole spent thinking about Claire Morgan, and they would spend a great deal more time thinking about her before the year was out. "You got a crew coming?" Earl asked. "No. You're going to put up 700 acres of fence by yourself." "Not all of it. The boundary." "That's what 8 miles of boundary up there. 8.4. Bill laughed out loud. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was the laugh of a man who has watched a lot of people fail at a lot of things. "Lady, there's men in this county spend their whole lives fencing, and they don't put up 8 miles alone." Claire stopped. She turned and looked at him, and later Bill would tell people about that look, and he would never quite get it right because it wasn't a hard look. It wasn't a challenge. It was the look of somebody who had already heard every version of "you can't" and had stopped finding it interesting. "I'm not in a hurry," she said. She paid cash. Earl remembered that. She counted it out of a plain envelope, hundreds, and she counted it twice, and she was correct to the dollar both times, and she never once moved her lips. Then she loaded 4,000 pounds of fencing material into her truck in the parking lot alone in 40 minutes, while 11 men watched her through the window, and none of them offered to help because something about the way she worked made it feel like it would be an insult. When she drove out, Bill Tarrow said, "Well." "Yep," Earl said. "She's not going to make it through winter." "Probably not." "Nobody's made it up there since Ray." "Nope. Wonder what she's running from." Earl watched the dust settle on the county road. "Everybody's running from something, Bill McWeston." "Yeah, but most folks run to town. She's running the other way." Sheriff Daniel Carter heard about her on Thursday because in a county with 410 permanent residents, information moves faster than it does in a city. It just moves worse. By the time it reached him, she had become a rich widow, a fugitive, a movie star, and a woman who had killed her husband in Nevada, depending on who you asked. He drove up there Friday because that was his job. The road to the Vance place was 11 miles of washboard gravel and then 4 miles of something that had stopped being a road during the Clinton administration. His County Explorer bottomed out twice. When he came over the last rise, he stopped and he sat there with the engine running and he stared. She'd been on that mountain 9 days. There was a cabin frame up, not a shack. A frame square and true with a foundation under it, and the joists were 16 on center, and there was a stack of milled lumber under a tarp that was tied down with knots he didn't recognize. There was a generator on a gravel pad. There was a water line trenched from the spring. And there was fence. Not a lot of it, maybe 600 yards. But it was the tightest fence he had ever seen in his life. And the corner brace at the end of the run was built like it was meant to hold up a bridge. She was on the roof. "Ma'am," he called out. She looked down at him. She had a nail gun in her hand and a tool belt on, and she was 15 feet in the air, on a frame with no railing, and she looked about as concerned as a person waiting for a bus. "Sheriff, you mind coming down a minute?" She came down. She didn't use the ladder for the last 6 feet. She just dropped, absorbed it in her knees, and stood up. Daniel had been a cop for 19 years, and he noticed things, and he noticed that. "Daniel Carter," he said, putting out his hand. "Claire Morgan." Her handshake was brief, and her palm was solid with callus, not the soft kind people get from a gym. "Welcome to the county." "Thank you." He waited. Most people fill a silence. She didn't. She just stood there comfortable and let it sit, and after about 6 seconds, Daniel realized he was the one who was uncomfortable, and that irritated him a little. "I came up to introduce myself," he said, "and to tell you a few things about this piece of ground." "All right. You know the history?" "Some." "Ray Vance owned this for 38 years. He was a decent man. He had it fenced, he had it posted, he had it patrolled. And by the end, he was 72 years old, and he had a colostomy bag and a shotgun he couldn't lift. And there were men driving four-wheelers past his kitchen window at 2 a.m. just to hear him yell." Claire didn't react. "They shot his dog," Daniel said. "March of 2015, right off his porch. Called it a coyote. Nothing I could prove." "What kind of bum?" He blinked. "Of all the questions." "Blue heeler, named Sadie." "Okay," Claire said. "He sold out and moved to his daughters in Boise, and he died 14 months later, and I'd say it was the moving that did it more than anything." Daniel took his hat off, turned it in his hands. "So what I'm telling you, ma'am, is that this land has a problem, and the problem isn't the land." "I know." "You know?" "Yes." "Then can I ask you why in the world you bought it?" She looked past him out at the long fall of the valley, the aspen just starting to turn the ridgelines stacked back into blue haze for 40 miles. "Because it was quiet," she said. "It's not going to stay quiet." "Then I'll deal with that." "Miss Morgan?" He put his hat back on. "I want to be very clear with you, because I've had this conversation before and it went badly. My department is me 2 full-time deputies and a part-timer who's also the school bus driver. We cover 4,000 square miles. If you call me from up here at midnight, I am 60 to 90 minutes out on a good night. In February, I might be 4 hours out. In a real storm, I'm not coming at all." "I understand." "I don't think you do. I've had 4 owners on this mountain in my career, and 3 of them left, and 1 of them died. There are men in this county who have hunted this ground since they were 8 years old, and they do not believe a piece of paper in a courthouse basement means one thing. It means something. It means something to me. It doesn't mean anything to them." Claire nodded slowly. "Then that's the actual problem, isn't it?" "How's that?" The line's not the problem. Everybody knows where the line is. It's whether anybody's willing to stand on it." Daniel Carter looked at her for a long moment. He was 51 years old, and he had heard a lot of tough talk in his life, most of it from men who folded the first time somebody raised their voice. This didn't sound like that. It sounded like a person stating the weather. "Just don't do anything stupid," he said. "I never have." He drove back down. Halfway to the county road, he pulled over and sat there and thought about the way she dropped off that ladder, and the way she'd stood in the silence, and the way she'd asked what kind of dog. Then he went back to the office, and because he was a good cop and not just a nice one, he ran her name. It came back clean. Too clean. Claire Elizabeth Morgan, 38, Montana driver's license issued 3 weeks ago, transferred from Virginia. No warrants, no priors, no civil judgments. Credit history that started at 22 and had almost nothing in it because she'd never carried a balance on anything in her life. And when he ran her employment through the databases he had access to, the field came back with a code he had only seen twice in 19 years. Not blank, restricted. He sat back in his chair and said out loud to nobody, "Well, Derek Holloway heard about the new owner at the Elkhorn on a Saturday night from a man who heard it from Bill Taro, and Derek laughed so hard he had to set his beer down. Derek was 44. He owned 1,100 acres on the other side of the drainage and a construction outfit that had built half the vacation homes in the valley and a Ford that cost more than most houses in Lodgepole. His father had owned the biggest cattle operation in the county, and his grandfather had owned it before that, and Derek had grown up understanding, in the way you understand your own name, that everything he could see from his porch was in some deep sense his, and any line on a map was a technicality invented by people who didn't live here. 700 acres, he said. Some woman. That's what they say, said Cole Beckett, who was 29 and working for Derek, and laughed when Derek laughed. Doing what? Fencing it, I guess. Fencing it. Derek shook his head. You know how many times that ground's been fenced? Ray fenced it 3 times. It's still open country. It's always been open country. You can't fence a mountain. She's putting up signs, too. Marlon saw him off the Blackfoot cut. Signs. Derek picked his beer back up. Signs are just paper somebody nailed to a tree. There were 5 of them in Derek's circle, and they had been in that circle for years. Cole Beckett, who did whatever Derek said. Marlon Reese, 41, a fair hand with a rifle and a bad hand with money, who owed Derek $11,000 and knew it. Wade Pruitt, 36, who had 2 DUIs and a temper. And Terrence Holloway, Derek's younger brother, 39, who was the smartest of them by a wide margin, and the one who occasionally said the thing nobody wanted to hear. Terrence said it that night. Might just leave her alone, he said. Derek looked at him. Say again. I'm just saying. Woman moves up there by herself, buys the ground legal, puts up a fence. Maybe we hunt the Kessler side this year. The Kessler side's got no elk. Then maybe we don't get an elk. Derek laughed and slapped the table, and the other 3 laughed with him, and Terrence drank his beer and looked at the wall, and that was the end of it. 2 weeks later, they crossed the fence. Not sneaking. That was the thing about Derek. He never snuck anywhere in his life. They came in on 4-wheelers at 10 in the morning, 4 abreast straight through a gate sheet hung with a chain, and a sign that said private property, no trespassing, all violations documented and reported. Derek stopped read the sign out loud in a high voice and then put a bolt cutter through the chain and left the gate hanging open. They rode for 4 hours across her land. They shot 2 spike bulls out of season and left one of them where it fell because it was too far to pack out. They ate lunch on her ridge. Wade Pruitt threw his beer cans in her creek, and nothing happened. No truck came up the fire road. No woman came out yelling. No shotgun, no threats, no confrontation, nothing. Derek came back off that mountain almost disappointed. Told you, he said in the parking lot at the Elkhorn. She's not up there, or she's up there hiding under the bed. Either way, that's still our country. There were cameras, Marlon said. So she's got accounted for. On trees, little ones. Derek shrugged. Let her take pictures. 9 days later, a certified letter arrived at Derek Holloway's house. It contained 41 photographs, time-stamped, geotagged, every one of them showing a face clearly enough for a jury. It contained a written log with dates and times and coordinates. It contained a photograph of Derek Holloway personally cutting the chain on the gate, taken from an angle that showed the sign his hands and the bolt cutters in the same frame. It contained no threat, no demand, no lawyer's name, no accusation even. Just a cover sheet, 1 line printed. Copies of this material have been provided to the Cascade County Sheriff's Department and Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Further copies are held off-site. Derek stood in his kitchen and read that 1 line about 9 times. Then he called Marlon. You said 4 cameras. I said I counted 4. How many were there? There was a pause on the phone. I don't know, Derek. Sheriff Daniel Carter got his copy the same day. He spread the photographs across his desk and went through them one at a time, and by the 12th one, he had stopped being amused. They were good photographs. That wasn't the thing. Anybody with money can buy a trail cam. The thing was where they were. Daniel had spent his whole life in those mountains, and he knew that ground. He knew the fire road and the creek crossings and the saddle where the elk moved at dawn. And whoever had placed those cameras had not put them where a person would think to put cameras. They had put them where a man walks when he thinks nobody is watching him. They had put them at the exact place on the ridge where you naturally stop to catch your breath. They had put them where the light would be behind the subject in the morning and in front of him in the afternoon. Every single camera was in the one spot on that whole piece of ground where a person would have to be sooner or later if they were doing what these men were doing. Daniel sat back and looked at the ceiling of his office for a while. That was not a fence. That was not a security system. That was a range card. He didn't know a lot about the military. He'd been a Marine for 4 years a long time ago, and mostly what he remembered was being cold. But he knew the word for it, and the word had been sitting in the back of his head since the day she'd asked him what kind of dog Ray Vance had. He picked up the phone and called a man he'd gone to boot camp with who now worked in Great Falls doing something with contracts. "Hey, Petey. Danny Carter. My God. I got a name I want to ask about. Probably you're going to tell me you can't. Try me. Claire Morgan. Morgan, 38. Navy, I think." There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that Daniel checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. "Pete. Where'd you get that name?" "She bought 700 acres in my county." "She bought?" "Yeah." Another silence. "Danny, listen to me. I don't have anything for you. I want to be real clear. I don't have anything, and if I did have anything, I wouldn't have it." "Pete. But I'm going to say one thing to you as a friend, and then I'm going to hang up, and we're going to talk about your knee next time. Okay? If a woman with that name is living in your county and she wants to be left alone, then the smartest thing anybody in that county can do is leave her alone." The line went dead. Daniel Carter sat there with the phone in his hand and 41 photographs on his desk, in the beginning of a very bad feeling in his stomach. Fish and Wildlife issued Derek Holloway a citation. Trespass hunting out of season, waste of game. $4,200 and a suspension of his hunting privileges for 1 season. Derek paid it in cash the same afternoon, the way a man pays a parking ticket. Then he went to the Elkhorn and got drunk and made a speech. "She sent a letter," he said. "You understand what I'm saying? A letter, grown woman living up on that mountain by herself, and her big move is the United States Postal Service." Everybody laughed. "She won't come out. She won't say a word. You know why? Because she can't. There's nothing up there but a scared little woman with a camera and a checkbook, and she thinks paper's going to hold that mountain." Terrence Holloway in the corner said, "Or she just doesn't want trouble." "Everybody wants trouble," Derek said. "Some folks just want somebody else to bring it." They went back in October, and this time it wasn't about elk. They found her cameras, all of them, they thought. They took a claw hammer to each one and left the pieces at the base of the trees. Wade Pruitt urinated on one. Cole Beckett filmed it on his phone, which is the kind of thing that seems very funny when you are 29 and drunk and standing on somebody else's mountain. They tore down 200 yards of her fence, not cut, tore with a chain and a truck so the T-post came out of the ground and the whole run came down in a tangle you'd need a day to sort out. They stacked her signs in a pile in the middle of the fire road and set them on fire. And they left one message. Wade's idea. They took a can of orange marking paint and wrote across the biggest piece of remaining fence in letters 2 feet high, "Go home." They came down off that mountain at midnight, howling out the windows of the truck. 14 miles away in a cabin with the lights off, Claire Morgan sat in a chair and watched all of it. Because they had found 9 cameras. There were 22. She watched the fence come down. She watched the signs burn. She watched Wade Pruitt spray paint 2 words on her property, and she watched Cole Beckett film it, and she watched Terrence Holloway stand off to the side with his hands in his pockets, not participating, not stopping at looking at his boots. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. Her breathing didn't change. She had watched worse things for longer in worse places and moved less. When it was over, she made a cup of coffee, and she sat back down and she watched all 4 hours again from the beginning, and this time she wrote in a notebook. Not what they did. Anybody could write down what they did. She wrote how. Holloway D leads, never checks behind him, never once in 4 hours, walks the high ground, wants to be seen. Pruitt W. erratic, drinks in the field, first to escalate, first to get bored. Beckett C. watches Holloway before every action, waits for approval, not a threat alone, Reese M. competent, actual woodsman, Reads sign, notices things. The only one who looked at the tree line, Holloway T, present not participating, body language unwilling, left the group twice, returned both times. Then at the bottom of the page, she wrote one more line and underlined it once. Reese looked at the tree line 4 times. Nobody else looked at anything. She closed the notebook. In the morning, she rebuilt 200 yards of fence. It took her 11 hours. She did not call the sheriff. She called him 3 days later, and when Daniel Carter arrived, she handed him a flash drive and a printed index and offered him coffee. Claire. He looked at the fresh fence, the new post, the raw gravel where the burn pile had been. Why didn't you call me that night? You were 4 hours out. I would have come. I know you would have. That's not the same thing. He rubbed his face. This is escalating. You understand that. This isn't kids anymore. Tearing out a fence with a truck, that's a felony. That's criminal mischief over $1,500. I know. So let me do something. Let me go talk to Derek. You've talked to Derek before. Daniel didn't answer that because she was right and he had, and it had accomplished exactly nothing on 4 separate occasions across 9 years. Claire, he said, I want to ask you something and I want a straight answer. All right. Are you scared? She thought about it. She actually thought about it, which he found unnerving because most people answer that question before you finish asking it. No, she said. Why not? Because they don't want to hurt me. They tore down your fence and burned your signs. That's not hurting me. That's asking me a question. What question? Claire looked out at the tree line. Whether I'll leave. And what's the answer? They already have the answer. They just don't like it, so they're going to keep asking. Daniel put his hat on. This is going to get worse. Yes. You could sell. Somebody'd buy it. I'd help you move. Sheriff, she said it gently. Do you know what happens if I leave? You go somewhere with neighbors in a plowed road. No, I mean what happens here. To this. She nodded at the mountain. The next person who buys this ground buys it knowing what happened to Ray Vance and what happened to me. And they'll do what Ray did and what the 2 before him did. They'll fight for a couple years and then they'll fold, and every time somebody folds, the line moves. And one day there's no line at all, and everybody in this county just quietly agrees that the law stops at the pavement. It's 700 acres of trees, Claire. It's not the Alamo. It's never about the trees. He drove home that night and he couldn't stop thinking about it. The first snow came the 2nd week of November. Claire had the cabin dried in by then. 1 room and a loft, a wood stove, a propane range, a sink with gravity feed from the spring, and 11 cords of split larch stacked under the eave in rows so straight they looked machined. She had a root cellar. She had 200 pounds of flour and rice and beans and a chest freezer running off the generator. She had a satellite phone she never used. She had no television, no radio, no photographs on the wall. She had 1 photograph, and it lived in a case under the floor. She took it out on the 18th of November because the 18th of November was the day. The case was matte black, and it locked, and inside it there was a set of documents in an envelope with a stamp on it that most people go their whole lives without seeing. There was a spotting scope. There was a set of night vision goggles, older generation, personally owned, purchased legally in a padded pouch. There were maps hand-annotated of places that were not in Montana. There was a trident tarnished the eagle's wing bent slightly where it had gotten crushed in a pack a long time ago. And there was a photograph of 2 people on a rooftop somewhere, hot squinting, arms around each other's shoulders, both of them filthy, both of them laughing. She sat on the floor with it in the lamplight for a long time. His name was Adam Reyes. He was 29 years old in that picture, and he would be 29 years old forever. They had been in an overwatch position for 51 hours. 51. 2 people in a hole the size of a bathtub taking water in sips, not talking above a whisper, watching a road. And on the 52nd hour, a boy of maybe 11 walked out onto that road with a plastic bag, and inside that bag was not what the intelligence said would be in the bag. And Adam made a call, and the call was the right call, and it killed him anyway. Claire had been the one on the glass. She had seen the boy at 400 meters. She had said what she saw. She had been correct about every observable fact in the world at that moment. And it hadn't mattered because the thing about being right is that it doesn't move a single molecule of the universe unless somebody acts on it in time. She'd carried him 900 meters. She was 134 pounds and he was 206 with his kid. And she carried him 900 meters over broken ground. And he was dead before she got to the wall. And she knew he was dead by meter 300. And she carried him anyway because you do not leave. They gave her something for it. The something is in a drawer somewhere. She has never once looked at it. What she thinks about at 3 in the morning, 12 years later, is not the boy or the road or the wall. It's that Adam had said 40 hours and out of nowhere in a whisper, you know what, I want a place with a fence. And she'd said, but yet a fence, yeah, little place. And a fence all the way around it, and I know where it is every inch. And anything on my side of it that's mine, and it's safe, and that's the whole deal. That's the entire thing I want out of my life, Morgan. And she'd said, that's it, that's your big dream, property maintenance. And he'd laugh silently, shaking the way you laugh when you can't make noise, and he'd said, you'll get it someday. You'll be old, and you'll have a fence, and you won't let anybody through it, and you're going to be so happy. 40 hours in, 11 hours before it happened. Claire put the photograph back in the case and closed the case and locked it and put the floorboard back down and went outside and split wood in the dark until her hand stopped shaking. That was who was living on that mountain. Nobody in Lodgepole knew any of it. They knew a quiet woman who bought a lot of fencing. On the 2nd of December, Derek Holloway did something that changed everything. And the strange thing is he did it almost casually, the way you'd flick a cigarette out a window. He drove up her fire road in daylight alone and parked at her gate and honked. She came out on the porch with a coffee cup. Not a rifle, a coffee cup. He got out and leaned on his truck. Claire Morgan. Mr. Holloway. He liked that she knew his name. He liked it a lot. So you do talk. Sometimes. I've been getting mail from you. That's right. Cost me $4,000. That sounds low. He laughed. It was a good laugh, warm, the kind that had gotten him out of a lot of rooms. You know I came up here to be neighborly. I want you to know that. All right. Because I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I think it's on account of you being new. Explain it to me. Derek gestured out at the mountain. My grandfather ran cattle across that draw. My father shot his first bull 300 yards from where you're standing. I have been on this ground since I was 6 years old. 6. Before you were born. Before Ray Vance owned it. Before the Vances came out here from Minnesota. Okay. So when somebody comes in from wherever and puts up a chain and starts mailing pictures to the government, what that feels like to me, ma'am, and I'm being honest with you, is disrespectful. Claire drank her coffee. You think it's disrespectful that I fenced my land. I think it's disrespectful that you fenced my history. That's a nice line. Derek's smile flickered, just slightly. You practiced that one, she said. Excuse me? It's a good line. I'm asking if you practiced it, because it's got a rhythm to it. My history. You've said that before. Derek straightened up off the truck. You want to be careful with me. No, Claire said. I don't think I do. And that right there was the moment. Later, much later, Daniel Carter would put it together and understand that everything that happened afterward was decided in that second, in the 20 feet of air, between a woman on a porch and a man leaning on a truck. Because Derek Holloway had come up that mountain fully prepared for her to yell. He'd have loved yelling. Yelling he could work with. Yelling means you can be moved. He was not prepared to be bored at. Let me tell you how this goes, Derek said, and his voice had changed, gone flat and quiet. You're going to have a hard winter. Roads get bad. Generators going to fail. Might be your water line freezes. And you're going to be up here alone at 2 in the morning with no propane, and there's not going to be a single soul in this county who's coming to help you. Not one, bud, because you're not from here and you don't know how it works. How does it work? Somebody's got to say it's all right for you to be here, and nobody has. Claire set her coffee cup down on the porch rail. Mr. Holloway, she said, can I tell you what I noticed? He didn't answer. You came alone. So, you've never done anything alone, not one time. 22 cameras, 400 hours of footage. You're never in a frame by yourself. Not once. There's always 3 men behind you. She tilted her head slightly. So today you came alone, which means you didn't want them to hear this conversation. Derek's jaw moved. Which means you already know how it ends, Claire said, and you don't want witnesses to you finding out. For about 4 seconds, nobody said anything at all. Then Derek Holloway smiled, and it was not a warm smile anymore, and he said, "See you around, ma'am." He got in his truck and he backed down that fire road for a quarter mile because there was nowhere to turn around. And Claire stood on the porch and watched him do it the whole way. And that quarter mile of backing up in front of a woman who would not stop looking at him did more damage to Derek Holloway than the $4,000 fine ever did. That night at the Elkhorn, he told them a completely different version. "She cried," he said, "practically." "Come on," Wade said. "I'm telling you, woman's a mess up there. Place is falling apart. She'll be gone by March." Terrence Holloway watched his brother's hands while he talked. Derek was a lot of things, but he was not a good liar when his hands were on the table, and his hands would not stay still. And Terrence had seen that maybe twice in his whole life, and both times something bad had come after. "Derek," he said quietly, "what did she actually say? I just told you. What did she actually say?" Derek picked up his beer. "She said she noticed things." "Noticed what?" "Nothing. She's nobody, Terrence. She's a woman with a hobby." And Derek Holloway went home and he lay in bed next to his wife. And at some point around 2 in the morning, he found himself thinking about the 22 cameras. He'd said out loud in the parking lot in October that they'd gotten them all. 9. He'd counted 9. She'd said 22 like it was the time of day, which meant that for 4 hours on that mountain in October, 13 cameras had been watching him that he never saw. 13. He had walked past them and stopped in front of them and stood there and never once, not one time, felt anything. Derek Holloway had been hunting for 38 years. He was proud of exactly one thing more than his land, and that was his eyes. He lay there in the dark and he thought about the fact that a woman had put 13 objects in the woods that he could not find. And for the first time in his adult life, in his own bed, in his own house, Derek Holloway felt something crawl up the back of his neck. And he did not have a name for it, and he did not sleep again that night. 9 days later, on the 11th of December, Marlon Reese called Sheriff Daniel Carter's cell phone at 11:40 at night, and Marlon Reese had never called a sheriff in his life for any reason. "Daniel." "Marlon, it's late, buddy. I need to ask you something, and I need you to not ask me why." Daniel sat up in bed. "Okay. That woman up on the Vance place. What about her?" Marlon's voice on the other end was strange. Not drunk. That was the thing Daniel noticed first and remembered longest. Marlon Reese was completely sober at 11:40 at night for the first time in a decade. "I found something up there," Marlon said. "Up on her ridge, back in October." "Marlon, you shouldn't be telling a sheriff you were on her ridge." "I know." "What did you find?" There was a long pause and Daniel could hear him breathing. "There's a spot," Marlon said, "up on the north shoulder above the burn. There's a place where somebody cleared the brush out. Real careful. You wouldn't see it unless you were laying down." "Okay. And there's a rock there with a notch cut in it, and there's a stake in the ground about 6 feet back. And there's 3 more of them, Daniel. 3 more spots, just like it's spread across that whole face. And every single one of them looks right down on that fire road." Daniel's mouth had gone dry. "You're sure?" "I've been reading sign in these mountains since I was a kid, and I have never seen anything like it in my life," Marlon said. "It's not a blind. It's not a stand. There's no bait. There's no trail. There's nothing to hunt from up there. You can't even pack an animal out of that face." "Then what is it?" "Daniel," Marlon's voice cracked just slightly, "there's 4 of them." "So, there's 4 of them, and there's 5 of us," the line hissed. "And I sat there and I looked at it for 20 minutes, Marlon said. "And I couldn't figure out why 4, and then I did, and I've been sick about it for 2 months. "Why 4, Tim?" "Because Terrence never crosses the fence." Daniel Carter said nothing. "She's counted us," Marlon said. "You understand what I'm telling you. She's counted us, and she left Terrence out." Then he hung up and he did not answer when Daniel called back 11 times. Sheriff Daniel Carter did not sleep that night either. He sat at his kitchen table until 4 in the morning with a legal pad in front of him, and nothing written on it except 4 words, and the 4 words were 4 positions, 5 men. At 6, he called Marlon Reese again. Voicemail. At 7, he called again. Voicemail. At 7:40, he drove out to Marlon's place on the Kessler Road, and Marlon's truck was there, and Marlon's dog was in the yard, and Marlon would not come to the door, and Daniel stood on that porch for 6 full minutes knocking, and he could see the shape of a man standing in the hallway through the frosted glass, not moving, waiting for him to leave. Marlon, he said through the door, whatever it is, we can talk about it. Nothing. Marlon, you called me. The shape in the hallway turned and walked away. Daniel drove back to town with both hands on the wheel and a feeling in his chest he hadn't had since he was 22 years old and a long way from home. He got to the office at 8:15, and his part-timer Louise, who also drove the school bus and who had never once in 9 years failed to say good morning, said, Sheriff Derek Holloway's been calling. Since when? Since 7. About what? He won't say. He's called 4 times. Daniel took off his coat, hung it up, sat down, and looked at the phone for a while before he picked it up. Derek answered on the first ring, which told Daniel everything he needed to know about how Derek Holloway's morning was going. Sheriff. Derek. I want to file a complaint. Daniel pulled the legal pad over. Go ahead. That woman's harassing me. There was a long pause on the line, and it went on long enough that Derek said, Hello? I'm here, Daniel said. I'm just trying to hold on to that one for a second. You think it's funny? I think it's the 9th of December, and you've got a citation for trespass hunting out of season and waste of game on a piece of property you don't own. I think funny's a strong word. She's watching my house. Daniel's pen stopped. Say that again. There's a vehicle, Derek said. 2 nights, parked down on the county road where it comes past my gate. Sits there an hour and a half, doesn't move no lights, then it's gone. You get a plate. No. You get a make. It's dark, Daniel. So a car parked on a public road near your house, and you want me to arrest a woman 14 miles up a mountain. I want you to go up there and look at what she's driving. I know what she's driving. She's driving a 1998 F-250, the color of dirt. Same as 40 other people in this county. Same as you before you bought the Ford. Derek's breathing changed on the line. Derek. Daniel leaned back. Can I ask you something man-to-man off the record? What? Are you sleeping? The line went dead. At 9:20 that same morning, 14 miles up the mountain, Claire Morgan was on her flenas in the snow rebuilding a corner brace that Wade Pruitt had knocked loose with a truck bumper in October, and she heard an engine coming up her fire road, and she did not stand up. She finished the wrap on the brace wire. She set the twitch stick. She turned it 11 times, checked the tension with her thumb, and only then did she get up and turn around. Terrence Holloway was standing at her gate with his hands out of his pockets and held slightly away from his body, which she noticed, and which meant he had thought about how to stand at her gate before he got there. Ma'am, he said, I'm not armed. I know. How do you know? Because you're standing like a man who wants me to know he isn't. Terrence almost smiled. My name's Terrence Holloway. I know that too. Yeah. He looked at the ground. I figured you might. You want to come in? He blinked. What? It's 9 degrees, Claire said. You want to come in, or you want to do this out here? He came in. He sat at her table and she poured him coffee, and he held it with both hands and looked around the one room, and there was nothing in it. That was what got him. He had expected he didn't know something. Photographs, a television, a rug. There was a stove, a table, 2 chairs, a bed in the loft, and 11 cords of wood outside stacked so neat it looked like a wall. You live like a monk, he said. I live like somebody who doesn't need much. That's the same thing. No, Claire said. Monks are trying to get somewhere. Terrence drank the coffee. It was very good coffee, which for some reason bothered him. I've got to say something to you, he said, and it's going to come out wrong. Say it wrong, then. My brother's not a bad man. Claire didn't answer. He's not, Terrence said. He coaches the youth football. He paid for Bill Taro's wife's whole funeral and never told a soul. I only know because I did the books. He pulled a family out of the ditch on the pass in a blizzard in 2019 and stayed with them 4 hours. All right. And he'd burn your house down. Claire looked up. He would, Terrence said. Both those things are true at once, and I've spent 40 years trying to make them be one thing, and they won't. He's the best man in this county, and he cannot stand to be told no. And the reason is, ma'am, nobody's ever told him no. Not once. Not our dad, not our mom, not a teacher, not a girlfriend, not a bank, not a sheriff. 44 years old, and you're the first. That's not my fault. No, ma'am, it's not. But it's your problem. Claire sat down across from him. Why are you telling me this? Terrence turned the coffee cup around in his hands. Because I saw you rebuild that fence, he said quietly. 200 yards in one day, by yourself. So, so I watched from the Kessler side with a spotting scope for 11 hours, Terrence said, and I want you to understand something. When my brother tore that fence down, what he was saying to you was, this is bigger than you, and it'll always be bigger than you, and you'll get tired. And you rebuilt it in a day, and you never called anybody, and you never said one word about it to one person in this town. And I have known my brother my whole life, and I know exactly what that did to him. Claire waited. It scared him, Terrence said, and Derek does not know how to be scared. He's never learned, so it's got to come out as something else, and the only something else he's got is bigger. The wind moved against the cabin. So he's going to do something, Terrence said. Yes. You already know that. Yes. Terrence looked at her for a long moment. You're not going to leave. No. Ma'am, I'm asking you. Not for him. For you. Take a winter somewhere. Go to Arizona. Come back in April, and I promise you on my mother this whole thing will have burned itself out because Derek can't hold a grudge past a season he's never had to. No. Why not? And Claire Morgan said something then that Terrence Holloway would repeat to exactly one person, 12 years later in the worst night of that person's life, and it would change what they did. She said, because I already left once. Terrence frowned. Left where? Doesn't matter. It clearly matters. I left a place, Claire said, and I told myself it was over, and I told myself I'd done my share, and for 11 years I've been waking up at 3 a.m, finding out that isn't how it works. She looked at him. You don't get to stop being the person who stands there. You only get to choose whether you're standing anywhere. Terrence sat with that. That's a hell of a way to live, he said. It's the only way I know how. He stood up. He put the cup in her sink, which she noticed, and rinsed it, which she noticed more. At the door, he stopped. Miss Morgan. Claire. He didn't turn around. There's 4 positions up on that north shoulder. Everything in the room stopped. Marlon found him in October, Terrence said. He's been drinking about it ever since, except now he's not drinking, and that's worse. And Wade found out 3 days ago, and Wade's been telling everybody at the Elkhorn that you're planning to kill him. Claire said nothing. So I'm going to ask you one question, Terrence said, and I'll believe whatever you say because I don't have anything else to go on. Ask it. He turned around. Are there 4 positions up there? And Claire Morgan looked him in the eye and said, there are 9. Terrence Holloway went white. 9, he said. Marlon found 4. He found the 4 he was supposed to find. Supposed to? Terrence. Her voice hadn't changed at all, and that was the thing he could never explain afterward, that her voice never changed not once the whole time. There is not one thing on that mountain that is an accident. Not one. Not a camera, not a sign, not a stake in the ground. Every single thing up there is exactly where I want it, and it is doing exactly what I want it to do. And what do you want it to do? I want them to stop. That's it. That's all I have ever wanted. Terrence put his hand on the door frame because he needed it. Then why let Marlon find any of them? He said. Why not hide them all? Claire said. Because a fence nobody can see isn't a fence. At 2:15 that afternoon, Wade Pruitt got drunk at the Elkhorn and made a phone call. He called the Cascade County Sheriff's Department and he told Louise, who was covering dispatch, because the school bus didn't run until 3, that there was a woman up on the Vance place who had built sniper hides overlooking a public road and was planning to murder 5 local men. Louise typed the whole thing up. She had to. That's how it works. And once it's typed, it's a report, and once it's a report, it exists, and once it exists, other people can read it. Daniel Carter read it at 3:50 and put his head in his hands. At 4:10, he called Fish and Wildlife. At 4:30, he called the county attorney. At 5, over the objection of every instinct he had, he drove up the mountain with a copy of the complaint on the side beside him. Claire read it at her kitchen table without any expression at all. Is it true? Daniel said. Define true. Claire, don't do that to me. Not today. Are there prepared shooting positions on your land overlooking that fire road? There are 9 cleared observation positions on my land, Claire said, and every single one of them is legal. And I'll take you to everyone right now with a flashlight if you want, and you can measure them and photograph them and bring the county attorney, And you know what he's going to find? What? Brush that's been cut on private property by the owner. She slid the complaint back across the table. There's no bench, no rest, no rangefinder, no cartridge, no optic, no weapon anywhere on this mountain except one bolt gun in a locked safe with a trigger lock on it that hasn't been fired in 11 years, and I will hand you the key right now. Daniel stared at her. Then what are they for, he said. And Claire said, they're for looking sheriff. That's all any of it's ever been for. Nobody's going to believe that. I know. Claire, he leaned forward. That's the point, isn't it? She didn't answer. That's the whole point, Daniel said slowly, and something cold went through him. You want them to believe it. I want them to stop crossing my fence. You could have put up a sign. I put up 40 signs. They burned them. So instead, you built 9 holes in the ground and let one man find 4 of them. Yes. Claire, that's my God. He sat back. That's terror. That's what that is. There's a word for that. Sheriff. And for the first time in 4 months, something moved behind Claire Morgan's face. I spent 11 years of my life doing a job where the entire skill was making a man understand there was a line without ever touching him. Not once. Never once. You know what the whole job is? It's convincing somebody that the cost of the next step is more than they want to pay, and then the whole rest of your life hoping they believed you. And if they don't believe you, she looked at him. Then somebody dies, she said. And it's always been my job to make sure it's not the person who was standing still. Daniel Carter drove down that mountain at 8 at night and pulled over twice. At 10:15, he called the county attorney and said, there's nothing here. And the county attorney said, good. And Daniel hung up and sat in his truck in his own driveway and did not go inside for 40 minutes. The next 11 days were quiet. That was the worst part. And everybody in Lodgepole felt it, even people who had no idea why. Derek Holloway did not come to the Elkhorn. Marlon Reese did not answer his phone. Cole Beckett quit Derek's crew on the 14th with no explanation and took a job in Bozeman hanging drywall and told his mother he just wanted a change. And his mother told Louise and Louise told Daniel, and Daniel wrote it on the legal pad under 4 positions, 5 men. He wrote Beckett gone, 4 left. And then he looked at it for a long time and crossed it out and wrote, Beckett gone, 4 left. She said 9. On the 16th of December at 4 in the morning, Derek Holloway drove to his brother's house and let himself in without knocking the way he had his whole life. Terrence came out of the bedroom in his shorts with a bat. It's me. Jesus Christ, Derek. Put that down. Terrence put it down. He turned on a lamp. Derek was standing in the middle of the living room in a canvas coat with snow melting off his boots onto the carpet, and he had not shaved, and he did not look like Derek Holloway. What time is it? Terrence said. You went up there. Terrence didn't answer. Wade saw your truck on the fire road. The 9th. Derek's voice was flat. You went up there and you sat in that woman's house. I did. Why? Because somebody had to talk to her, Derek, and you can't. Derek's hands were shaking. Terrence saw it, and Derek saw him see it and shoved them in his pockets. What did she say? She said she's not leaving. What else? Derek. What else did she say? And Terrence Holloway made a decision in about a second and a half that he thought about every day for the rest of his life. He said, she said there's 9 of them. Derek didn't move. 9 what? He said. You know what? Marlon said 4. She said Marlon found the 4 she wanted him to find. The clock on the mantel ticked 11 times before Derek said anything, and when he did, his voice had gone up half an octave, and it did not sound like a grown man. She's lying. Maybe. She's lying, Terrence. She's got no cameras. She's a woman on a hill with a bunch of stakes in the ground playing a game. She's not playing a game. How do you know? Because she didn't want to tell me, Terrence has said, but that's how you know Derek. That's how you've always known. Anybody who wants to tell you a thing is lying to you. She told me because I asked, and she doesn't lie. She looked me in the eye and told me a number that makes her look like a monster because I asked her a straight question, and she doesn't have it in her to give me a crooked answer. Derek turned away. I'm going up there, he said. No. I'm going up there with Wade and Marlon, and we're going to walk that whole north shoulder in daylight, and we're going to find every one of them and pull every stake out of the ground, and then it's over. Derek, It's my county. Derek. Terrence grabbed his arm, and Derek ripped it away, and for 1 second, the two of them were 11 and 14 again in their mother's kitchen. Listen to me. Listen. If you go up there and you find 9, what happens? Then I've found him. And if you find 11, Derek stopped. What if you find 11, Derek? Terrence said. What if you find 14? What if you walk that face for 6 hours in the snow and you find 19 holes in the ground and you get to the top and you turn around and you look back down at all of them and you understand that she made every single one of them with her own 2 hands alone in the dark for you? Derek stood in his brother's living room with snow melting off his boots. Then what? Terrence said. Then what do? Because you can't unsee it. You can't. You'll be 60 years old on your own porch looking at that mountain. Derek said very quietly, she's just a woman. Then why are you shaking? And Derek Holloway hit his brother. Not hard. That was almost the worst of it. He hit him open-handed across the face the way you'd hit somebody in a movie, and it made a sound like a book dropping, and then he stood there and looked at his own hand like he'd never seen it before. Terrence didn't touch his face. He just stood there. Get out of my house, he said. Derek left. He drove home, and he did not go inside. He sat in his truck in his own driveway until the sun came up, and he thought about the 13 cameras he never saw, and he thought about backing a quarter-mile down a fire road with a woman watching him do it, and somewhere around 6:30 in the morning on the 16th of December, Derek Holloway stopped being angry. That was the real turn. Everybody afterward said he got angrier and angrier until he snapped, and that's not what happened at all. He stopped being angry, because anger is what a man feels when he still believes he's going to win. At noon on the 17th, Marlon Reese walked into the sheriff's office, sat down in the chair across from Daniel Carter's desk and said, I want to make a statement. Daniel closed the door. About what? About October, and about September, and about a bunch of stuff going back about 9 years. Marlon, you understand what you're doing? Yeah. You're going to hand me a felony with your own mouth? Yeah. Why, Mom? And Marlon Reese, who was 41 years old and owed Derek Holloway $11,000 and had not been sober 11 days in a row since he was 26, said, because I've got a boy. Daniel waited. He's 9, Marlon said. Lives with his mom in Missoula. I get him 3 weekends a year. And last one in September, he asked me what I do, and I said I hunt. And he said, my mom says you don't hunt, you just shoot things. He stopped and pressed the heel of his hand into his eye. And I laughed, Marlon said. I laughed, Daniel, because it was funny. And then I went up on that woman's mountain in October, and I helped tear down her fence, and I stood there while Wade wrote "Go Home" on it in orange paint, and I laughed at that too. Marlon. And then I found those 4 spots up on the shoulder. His voice went strange. And I laid down in one. Daniel's hands went still on the desk. I laid down in it, Marlon said, just to see, and Daniel, I could see the whole fire road. The whole thing, every foot of it, from the gate to the burn. And I laid there in the dirt for about a minute, and I thought about how many hours I'd spent walking up and down that road, laughing and hollering and throwing cans out the window, and I thought she's watched every second of it. He looked up. Every second, he said. 4 months. She never once said a word. And it hit me sitting in that hole that I have never in my whole life had a single person look at me that hard and not tell me what they thought about it. That's not an answer. Yeah, it is. Marlon wiped his face. Because I sat up and I looked back at that little cabin 14 miles off with the smoke coming out of it, and I understood something. She's not up there hunting us. Then what's she doing? She's waiting for us to be done. Daniel Carter did not say anything. She's just waiting for us to be finished, Marlon said, like you wait out weather, like we're weather. And I have been a lot of things in my life, Daniel, but I have never in 41 years been somebody's weather. He signed the statement at 2:40. 11 pages, he named himself first. He named Wade Pruitt, Cole Beckett, and Derek Holloway. He did not name Terrence Holloway because Terrence Holloway had never crossed the fence. At 3:10, Daniel walked him to the door and said, you know what happens now? Yeah. Derek's going to know by 6. Yeah. You got somewhere to go. Marlon Reese stood in the parking lot in the cold and looked up at the mountain, which you could see from the sheriff's office on a clear day, a long white shoulder standing over the whole valley, like it had been standing there since before anybody's grandfather came out from Minnesota. Daniel, he said, can I ask you something crazy? Sure. You think she'd let me fix that fence? Daniel didn't have an answer for that. Marlon got in his truck and drove away, and Daniel Carter watched him go, and then he went back inside and picked up the legal pad and looked at what he'd written. Beckett gone. Reese out, 2 left. She said 9. And then because he was a good cop, he did the math nobody in that county had done yet, and he wrote it at the bottom of the page and stared at it until his hands went cold. 9 positions, 5 men in September, 2 men left in December. She hadn't built those positions to shoot anybody. She'd built them to take them apart one at a time without ever touching one of them. And it was working. At 11 that night, Derek Holloway called Wade Pruitt and said 4 words. Bring the dogs and the sled. We're going up in the morning. Wade Pruitt did not sleep either, and at 4:50 in the morning on the 18th of December, he stood in his own kitchen with a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk and said out loud to nobody, "This is stupid." Then he loaded the dogs anyway. That was the thing about Wade. He had never once in his life done something he believed in. He did what was in front of him, and what was in front of him was Derek Holloway's headlights coming down the road at 5 in the morning, and 40 years of understanding that when those headlights came down the road, you got in the truck. Derek didn't say hello. He said Marlon talked. Wade's stomach dropped. Talk to who? Who do you think? When, yesterday, 11 pages, Derek's hands were on the wheel at 10 and 2, and they were perfectly still now, which anybody who knew him would have found more frightening than the shaking. He named you. Derek, he named me. He named all of us. Then what are we doing? Wade's voice cracked. Derek, what are we doing right now? If he named us, then we ought to be sitting in a lawyer's office in Great Falls. We ought to be. Why are we going up there? Derek looked at him. Because it doesn't matter anymore, he said. And Wade Pruitt, 36 years old, 2DU, is a temper, and not one original thought in his entire life understood in that second that he was in a truck with a man who had already decided something, and that whatever it was, Wade was going to be standing next to it when it happened. He should have gotten out. He thought about it for 4 seconds at the stop sign on the county road. He didn't. At 5:40, they came through the gate, not around it. Through it, Derek put the front bumper of an $80,000 Ford against a chain and drove, and the gate post came out of the ground with a sound like a bone breaking, and the whole assembly gate chain sign, and all went down under the tires. 2 miles up the fire road, they parked and unloaded the sled and the dogs, and Derek pulled a rifle out of the back seat. Wade stared at it. Derek, what? Why do you have that? It's December in Montana. Derek, if Marlon named us and you go up on that woman's ground with a rifle, that is not man. That's not the same thing as it was. Then stay with the truck. Wade stood there in the dark with 2 dogs pulling against their leads and looked at the man he'd followed since 9th grade. Derek, he said, and it came out small. Are we going to hurt her? And Derek Holloway said, I'm going to find her holes and I'm going to pull every stake out of the ground and I'm going to lay them in a pile on her porch and I'm going to look at her one time. That's it. That's it. Swear to God. Wade, Derek shouldered the pack. I've got a wife and 2 kids and a business and a name my grandfather put on a road. What in the world do you think I'm going to do? And that Wade told Daniel Carter later that was the moment he believed him. Because it was true. Every word of it was true. Derek Holloway was not a man who was going to hurt anybody. Derek Holloway was a man who could not, under any circumstance available to him, walk back down that mountain, having not found those holes. They went up at 6:10 in the morning. At 6:40, 14 miles away and 1,100 feet up, Claire Morgan woke to a soft tone from a device on her table, looked at a screen for 9 seconds, and said one word out loud in an empty cabin. The word was no. She had not said no to anything in 4 months. She reached for the satellite phone she had never used, and she called Daniel Carter, and when he answered, thick with sleep, she said something that made him sit straight up in bed with his heart going like a hammer. Sheriff, there are 2 men on my mountain, and there's a storm coming in behind them, and they don't know it. Claire, what? Derek Holloway and Wade Pruitt came through my gate at 5:40. They've got dogs and a sled, and they're heading for the north shoulder. How do you know that? Because I've watched that man walk for 4 months, and he walks the high ground, and he never checks behind him. Her voice was going faster than he'd ever heard it. Daniel, listen to me. There's a system coming down out of Alberta. It was supposed to track east. It didn't. It's going to be on that face by 11, and it's going to drop the visibility to nothing, and it's going to hold for 18 hours. Daniel was already pulling his pants on. How do you know that? And they don't. Because I look at the weather every single morning of my life, Claire said, and they've never had to. Okay, Claire, stay in the cabin. I'm going to call. I'll get search and rescue on standby. I'll get how long do I have? You don't have any. What? Sheriff. And now her voice did change, and Daniel Carter had never heard it before and never heard it again. Nobody is getting up that road today. Not you, not rescue, not a helicopter. In 4 hours, nothing on this earth is getting up that road. The line was quiet. Claire, Daniel said, what are you going to do? And Claire Morgan said, I'm going to go get them. No, absolutely not. You stay in that cabin. Do you hear me? You are the one person in this county. Those men have a reason, Claire. They have a rifle. I know. Then you understand what you're saying. Daniel. She was already moving. He could hear it. I know that mountain. They don't. In 4 hours, they're going to be on the north face in a whiteout with a rifle and 2 dogs and no shelter, and a man who cannot admit he's wrong, and I am the only human being alive who can walk to them. Claire, you don't owe those men one single thing. I know. They tore down your fence. I know. They burned your signs. They shot at your cameras. They wrote "Go home" on your property. Sheriff, and here she stopped for about 2 seconds, and when she spoke again, it was quiet. The line is only worth something if the person holding it is better than the people crossing it. Otherwise, it's just a fight over dirt. Then she hung up on him. At 7:30, Daniel Carter called search and rescue. At 7:50, he called the state. At 8:10, a man in Helena told him the window was closing, and Daniel said, I know, and the man said, no, sir. I mean, it's closed, and Daniel Carter sat down on the edge of his desk and put his hand over his mouth. At 8:15, Terrence Holloway walked in the door. Where's my brother? He said. At 8:50, Derek and Wade found the first one. It was exactly where Marlon said it would be. A cleared oval on the north shoulder above the burn brush, cut low and cut clean, and a rock with a notch in it and a stake in the ground 6 feet back. Wade wouldn't go near it. Derek went and stood over it and looked down. And then he got down on his knees and then his belly, and he laid down in it, and he looked down the mountain. He didn't move for a long time. Derek, Wade said, Derek, come here. No. Wade, come here. Wade came. Look, Derek said, look at the road. Wade looked. The fire road ran out below them like a length of rope somebody had dropped, and you could see it, all of it, gate to burn, every inch, every switchback, every place where a man in a truck might stop and open a beer and throw the can in a creek. You could see everything from here, Wade said. Yeah. Derek, you could see that's 4 miles. Yeah. How many times have we come up that road? Derek didn't answer. How many times, Derek? 9 years, Derek said. Wade Pruitt straightened up and looked around at the empty white face of that mountain, and something went through him that he could not name and never got over. She's seen us, he said. She's seen all of it. Get the stake. Derek. Get the stake, Wade. Wade pulled the stake. It came out of the frozen ground harder than it should have, and when he had it in his hand, he looked at it, and it was a piece of rebar 18 inches long, and somebody had wrapped the top of it in green tape so it wouldn't shine. She taped it, he said. So Bershine. Derek, she taped it so it wouldn't shine. Derek took it out of his hand and put it in the pack and said, that's one, and started walking. At 9:40, they found the second. At 10:10, they found the third, and the third one was 200 yards from where Marlon had said, which meant Marlon had missed it, which meant there were more, which everybody already knew, and nobody had said out loud. At 10:40, they found the fourth, and at the fourth, Wade Pruitt sat down in the snow and said, I'm done. Get up. Derek, there's 4. That's the 4. That's what Marlon found. It's done. Let's go. She said 9. She said 9 to your brother in her kitchen to mess with him. That's Derek. That's the whole point. That's the entire. Then we'll find 9 and it'll be over. And if there's 9, Wade was shouting now up on that face in the wind, and the dogs were pulling and whining and looking at the sky, which he did not notice and which Derek did not notice either. If there's 9, then what? Then we know she made 9. How is that better? How is any of this better? Derek Holloway turned around and looked at him, and Wade saw his face, and what Wade saw was not rage. It was a man who had run out of road. Because if there's 9, Derek said, then I'm not crazy. The wind came up at 11:05. It did not build. That's what people who have never been in it don't understand. It did not come slowly and give anybody a chance to think about it. At 11:04, Wade Pruitt could see 4 miles down a fire road, and at 11:09, he could not see the dog at the end of his own arm. Derek, stay where you are. I can't see you. Wade, do not move. But Wade moved because everybody moves, because a human being standing in white with nothing to look at will move. It is the oldest thing in us, and there is no talking anybody out of it. And Wade Pruitt took 11 steps in what he was certain was the direction of Derek Holloway's voice. And then he was alone on the north face of a mountain in a whiteout with 2 dogs and no rifle and no shelter and no idea which way was down. He screamed for 4 minutes. Then he stopped because his throat closed up and he sat down and he understood with total clarity that he was going to die there. At 11:20, Claire Morgan came off her porch. She had a pack. She had a compass and a paper map and a bearing she had walked 140 times in 4 months in daylight, in dark, in rain, and twice with her eyes closed on purpose. She did not have a rifle. She had thought about it for exactly as long as it took to put her boots on, and she left it in the safe lock because Claire Morgan had spent 11 years learning that the moment you bring a weapon to a problem, the problem becomes about the weapon. She stepped off the porch into a wall of white and started walking. At 11:50, Daniel Carter and Terrence Holloway got a County Explorer 9 miles up the county road and put it in a ditch, and Terrence said, "We walk," and Daniel Carter, who was 51 and had a bad knee and knew exactly how this ended, said, "Terrence, we can't. That's my brother. I know it is. That's my brother up there." "Terrence," Daniel grabbed him by the coat with both hands. "You go up that road right now in this, and tomorrow there's 3 of you instead of 2, and I'm going to be the man who has to tell your mother he watched you go." Terrence Holloway stood in that road and screamed until he had nothing left, and Daniel Carter held on to him. The whole time at 12:40, Claire found the dogs. They were the reason she found Wade at all. She heard them at maybe 40 meters, which in that wind was nothing, and she went to the sound, and there was a man sitting in the snow with his arms around 2 dogs not moving, and she got down in front of him and put her hand flat on his chest. Wade Pruitt looked up, and his face came apart. "Oh God," he said, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." "Wade Pruitt, you're oh God, please." "Wade, look at me." She had his face in both hands. "What's your name?" "Wade." "Wade what?" "Wade Allen Pruitt." "Good." "Wade, I'm Claire. Can you stand up?" And Wade Pruitt, who had urinated on her camera and thrown his cans in her creek and laughed, while a man wrote "Go home" on her fence in orange paint, sat in the snow and looked at the woman who had walked 4 miles through a whiteout to find him and said the only thing that was in him, "I'm sorry." "I know." "No, you don't. You don't, ma'am. Wade," she pulled him up. "You can be sorry down there. Up here, you're going to walk." "Where's Derek?" Wade started sobbing. I don't know. I moved. She told me not to move, and I moved." "He told you not to move." "What?" "You said she. Derek told you not to move." Wade blinked at her through the ice on his face. "Wade, when did you last hear him?" "I don't, an hour. We were on the 4th when he was going up. He said he had to find all 9. And Claire Morgan closed her eyes for 1 second. "He went up," she said. "He said he wasn't crazy." Claire turned her head into the wind and looked at nothing at all for about 3 seconds. And in that 3 seconds, she did something that 11 years of the worst job in the world had trained her to do, which was arithmetic. 1 man on her arm, hypothermic 30 minutes from useless. 2 dogs, 4 miles to the cabin downhill on a bearing she knew. 1 man somewhere above her on a face she had walked, but he had not going up into it with a rifle in 44 years of never having been told no. She could not do both. Every single person she ever told this to afterward, and there were only 3, said the same thing: "You did the right thing." And she said every time the same thing back. She said there's no such thing, there's only the thing you can live with. She put Wade Pruitt on a bearing of 210 degrees, and she gave him her compass, and she put the dogs on his belt. And she said, "Do not look up. Do not look around. Watch the needle. 210. You walk 210 for 1 hour and you will hit a fence. And when you hit that fence, you turn left and you follow it with your hand and it will take you to a door. You're not coming. No. Ma'am, you can't. In this, you can't. Wade? He's got a rifle. Wade screamed it. He's got a rifle and he thinks you're ma'am, please. He's been talking about you for 4 months. He doesn't sleep. He's not. I know, Claire said. Then why? And Claire Morgan said, because he's on my land. Then she turned and went up. At 1:50 in the afternoon, Derek Holloway found the 5th position. He was on his hands and knees by then. He had lost his hat. His face was gone past pain, into the thing after pain, where it's just a piece of meat you're carrying around. He had dropped the rifle at some point, and he could not remember when, and it did not matter because he was not going to shoot anybody. He had never been going to shoot anybody. He had come up this mountain to prove a number. He found the 5th by falling into it. He lay there, and he laughed. It came out as a wheeze, but it was a laugh. 5, he said. That's 5. At 2:15, he crawled 90 feet and found the 6th. At 2:40, he found the 7th. And at the 7th, Derek Holloway stopped laughing because the 7th position was not looking down at the fire road. The 7th position was looking at the 6th. He lay in it and turned his head and understood, and it was the last clear thought he had for 6 hours. They weren't hides. They were a line, 9 cleared spots on a mountain face, and they did not cover a road, they covered each other. They were laid out the way you lay out a thing that is meant to hold a piece of ground with no one in it. And Derek Holloway lay in the 7th hole on his own knees in a whiteout, and finally at 44 years old, got the answer to the question he had been screaming at a mountain for 4 months. She had not built them to hunt him. She had built them to hold a line she was never going to shoot across. 9 holes, 1 woman. She could only ever be in one of them at a time, and she had dug 9, and she had let one man find 4, and every single thing she had done for 4 months, every camera, every sign, every certified letter, every silence had been a way of saying the same sentence over and over to a man too proud to hear it. The sentence was, I am not going to hurt you. I am simply not going to move. Derek Holloway put his face in the snow and made a sound that was not a word. At 3:10, something took him by the collar. He came up swinging. He got one hand on a coat and he had it, and he was going to he didn't know. And then a voice about 6 inches from his ears said very calmly, Derek Holloway, it's Claire. He froze. Derek, can you hear me? He couldn't see her. There was nothing to see. There was a shape. Yeah, he said. Yes. You came up here. Yes. Why? And Claire Morgan on her knees in 11 inches of new snow on the north shoulder of a mountain she had bought with cash from a man in Boise who was already dead, put her arm under a man who had spent 4 months trying to break her and said the only true thing she had left. She said because nobody else was coming. Derek Holloway started to cry. Not a little. Not the way a man cries. He came apart in her arms on his knees and he was saying something over and over, and she had to put her ear against his mouth to get it. And what he was saying was, there's 9, there's 9, there's 9. I know. Why'd you build 9? And she said, so I'd never have to use one. At 3:30, she got him up. He could not walk. She got him up anyway because she had done this before, exactly this once 12 years ago, over 900 meters of broken ground with a man on her back who was already gone. She had been 134 pounds then. She was 141 now, and Derek Holloway was 230, and the difference between then and now was that this time she got there in time. She walked him 2 miles. At some point, around 4:30, he stopped being able to hold his head up, and she went down on one knee in the snow with all of his weight on her, and she stayed there for 11 seconds, and she said out loud into the wind to a man who had been dead for 12 years, Adam, hey, Adam. Nothing answered but the wind. I got the fence, she said, and she stood up. At 6:51 that evening, Wade Pruitt hit a wire fence with his hands in the dark. He turned left. He followed it with his palm for 400 yards, and his palm was open and bleeding by the end because he would not take it off the wire for 1 second. And it took him to a door, and the door was unlocked, and there was a wood stove still warm and a lamp and a note on the table in block letters that said food in the cellar. Water from the tap. Do not go back out. Wade Pruitt read that note 11 times, and then he lay down on the floor of Claire Morgan's cabin next to her stove with two dogs, and he cried like a child until he passed out. At 8:40, the door opened. Wade came off the floor. Claire Morgan came through it backwards, dragging 230 pounds of Derek Holloway across the threshold by the collar of his coat, and she got him inside, and she got the door shut against the wind with her shoulder, and then she stood there, and she did not fall down, and she did not sit down, and Wade Pruitt would tell people for the rest of his life about what she did next. She looked at Derek on the floor. She looked at Wade, and she said, "Get his boots off." Then she went and put another log in the stove. The storm held for 19 hours. For 19 hours, Derek Holloway and Wade Pruitt lay on the floor of a one-room cabin belonging to a woman they had spent 9 months trying to run off a mountain, and she fed them and she got fluids in them, and she cut Derek's boots off with a knife because his feet had swollen past the laces, and she worked on his hands for 2 hours with her own hands, and she never said one single word about any of it. Not one word. Not October. Not the fence. Not the gate. Not go home. And that silence did something to those two men that no punishment on this earth could have done. Around 3 in the morning, Derek Holloway said from the floor in the dark, "Why didn't you say anything?" Claire was in the chair. She'd been in the chair for 6 hours and she had not slept. "About what?" she said. "Any of it. 4 months. You never said anything. You never yelled at me. You never called me one name. Why didn't you ever say anything to me?" And Claire Morgan said, "Because I was never talking to you, Derek." He didn't understand. "I was talking to the next one," she said, "and the one after him." At 6 in the morning on the 19th of December, the wind stopped. At 9:40, a search and rescue helicopter came up the drainage and put down in a meadow 400 yards from Claire Morgan's cabin, and Sheriff Daniel Carter came out of it running, and Terrence Holloway was 3 steps behind him and passed him at the fence. They came through that door expecting a body. What they found was 2 men asleep on the floor under wool blankets, 2 dogs by the stove, and a woman sitting in a chair by the window with a cup of coffee, looking out at the light coming up over 8.4 miles of fence. Daniel Carter stood in the doorway. "Claire," he said, "Sheriff." He looked at the floor. He looked at her. He looked at her hands, which were wrapped in gauze, and at the boots by the door, which were cut open, and at the pile of 18-inch rebar stakes with green tape on the ends, stacked neat by the wall where somebody had emptied out a pack. "What happened up there?" he said. And Claire Morgan looked out the window at her mountain and said, "2 men crossed my fence." Daniel waited. She didn't say anything else. She never did. The helicopter took Derek Holloway off that mountain at 10:15 on the morning of the 19th of December, and the last thing he did before they loaded him was reach out and grab Claire Morgan's sleeve with a hand wrapped in gauze and try to say something. Nothing came out. She looked down at him. "Later," she said. They took Wade Pruitt too. He walked to the helicopter on his own feet, which the medics said afterward he had no business doing, and halfway across the meadow he stopped and turned around and looked at that cabin for so long that Terrence Holloway had to come get him by the arm. "Wade, come on." "She left the door unlocked," Wade said. "What?" "Terrence, she went up that mountain to get us, and she left her door unlocked." Wade's face was doing something terrible. Anybody could have walked in. Anybody. She just, "Wade, there was a note on the table. I saw it. There was a note on the table telling me where the food was," Wade said, and then his legs went out from under him, and Terrence Holloway caught a grown man in a meadow at 10:20 in the morning and held him up while he came apart. At 11:40 in this hallway of Benefice Health in Great Falls, a doctor told Derek Holloway's wife that her husband was going to keep all 10 fingers and 8 of his toes, and that she should thank whoever got him off that hill, because at his core temperature, he'd been somewhere around 90 minutes from a place nobody comes back from. 90 minutes. Derek had lain in that 7th hole for at least an hour. He did that math himself at 2 in the morning 3 days later, alone on morphine, and he started crying so hard the night nurse came in and thought something had ruptured. The story hit the county before the helicopter blades stopped turning. By noon on the 19th, everybody in Lodgepole had a version. By the 20th, Bill Tarrow had told 9 people at the coffee counter that Claire Morgan had carried Derek Holloway 4 miles on her back, which was not true. It was 2 miles, and Claire never corrected it because Claire never said anything to anybody. By the 23rd, a woman in Missoula had put it on the internet. By the 28th, a reporter from Denver was standing at the end of Claire Morgan's fire road. She didn't come out. He waited 5 hours. He left a card in her gate. He wrote a story anyway, and the story was 90% wrong. And the headline had the word sniper in it, and after that it did not matter what was true. At 9 in the morning on the 2nd of January, the county attorney, a careful man named Roland Pace, who had been in that job 19 years and had never once been on television, called Sheriff Daniel Carter into his office and closed the door. "Sit down." "I'll stand." "Daniel, sit down." Daniel sat. Roland Pace put 2 files on the desk. "This one," he said, "is Marlon Reese's statement. 11 pages. It's the cleanest thing I've read in a decade. He hands me Holloway Pruitt Beckett and himself for felony criminal mischief, 4 counts of trespass, and about 9 years of poaching that I can charge maybe 2 of. Okay. And this one," Pace put his hand flat on the second file, "is a complaint filed by Wade Pruitt on the 11th of December, alleging that Claire Morgan constructed sniper positions overlooking a public roadway with intent to commit homicide." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Roland, I know. That is a drunk man on a bar stool. I know that. That complaint is garbage. There's no weapon. There's no—" "Daniel." Pace took his glasses off. "There is a photograph of 9 cleared shooting positions on a mountain on the front page of a newspaper in Denver, next to a picture of a woman the article calls a Navy SEAL sniper. And I have got 4 calls this morning from people who want to know why I haven't charged her." "With what?" "That's exactly the question." "So answer it." Roland Pace put his glasses back on. "Nothing," he said. "The answer is nothing. There is no crime. There is not one statute in the state of Montana that says a woman can't cut brush on her own ground. She's not been charged with anything. She's not going to be charged with anything, and I'll say that on the record in front of God in the Great Falls Tribune." Daniel let out a breath he'd been holding for 2 weeks. "But," Pace said, "there it is. But she's going to have to say it." "Say what?" "Say what she was doing up there, Daniel." Pace leaned forward. "1 sentence. 1. I need her to sit in a chair in a room with a court reporter and say I cleared brush to observe trespassers on my property, and I have never pointed a weapon at any human being in the state of Montana. That's it. 30 seconds. And this whole thing evaporates." Daniel Carter looked at him. "She won't do it," he said. "Why not?" "Because she doesn't explain. Everybody explains. Not her. Daniel, she'd be doing it for herself." And Daniel Carter said that's exactly why she won't. He drove up there on the 3rd of January. She was on the fence line, which she was every morning, and he stood there and told her the whole thing, the complaint, the newspaper, the calls, the 30 seconds, and she listened to all of it with a fence tool in her hand, and when he was done, she said, "No. Claire, no. It's 30 seconds. It's not 30 seconds, Sheriff. It's a precedent." She set the tool down. "If I sit in that chair and explain myself, then what I've said forever is that a person who did nothing wrong owes an answer to a man who did. And every person in this county who's ever been leaned on will watch me do it." "Nobody's watching you." Claire looked at him. "Sheriff," she said, "everybody in this county has been watching me since the day I walked into that hardware store, and you know it." Daniel took his hat off and rubbed his head. "They'll say you did it," he said. "You understand that if you don't say a word, they will fill it in with whatever they want. There are people already saying you drove those men up there. There's a man at the Elkhorn saying you started that storm. I know. They'll make you a monster." "They'll make me something," Claire said. "They were always going to make me something. That's not mine to carry." "Then what is—" She looked out at 8.4 miles of wire that had been down twice and was up now. "The fence," she said. And Daniel Carter drove down that mountain and did not know whether he had just talked to the strongest person he had ever met or the loneliest one, and it took him about 4 more months to understand it was both. Then on the 9th of January, Derek Holloway did the thing nobody in the history of Cascade County saw coming. He walked into Roland Pace's office on 2 crutches, with his wife on one side and his brother on the other, and he sat down and he said, "I'd like to plead guilty." Pace stared at him. "Derek, you have a lawyer." "I fired him." "You, Bo, this morning at 8. Derek's hands were still wrapped. "Roland, I've known you since we were 9. I want to plead guilty to all of it. The gate, the fence, the cameras, the elk, the whole 9 years. And I want to say some things on the record. Derek, Pace's voice went careful. Son, I have to tell you to stop talking and go get your lawyer back. I know. You're looking at felony time. I know. Then why? And Derek Holloway said, because I laid in a hole on that woman's mountain and I finally understood what she was doing, and if I don't say it out loud, then she's the only one who knows, and she won't ever say it, and then it never happened. He talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The transcript is 109 pages, and it is a public document, and people in that county still read it. He said on the record, she never threatened me, not one time in 9 months. Not a word, not a look, not a gesture. I want that in there. He said, I cut the chain on that gate on the 21st of September with a bolt cutter I bought at Earl's for $61, and I looked into her camera when I did it because I wanted her to see me do it. He said, there's a thing I have to explain and I don't know how. Everybody thinks I hated her. I didn't hate her. I couldn't get her to react. That's all it ever was. I did a thing and she didn't react, so I did a bigger thing and she didn't react, so I did a bigger thing, 9 months. And every single time I got bigger, she stayed exactly the same size, and after a while sitting in my truck at 2 a.m, I started to feel like I was the one shrinking. Roland Pace said, Derek, why are you telling me this? And Derek Holloway said, because she came and got me. The room went quiet. You have got to understand, Derek said. She knew what I was. She'd watched me for 4 months. She watched me tear her fence out of the ground with a truck. She had every reason on God's earth to sit in that cabin and let that mountain do what mountains do, and nobody would have known, and I'd have deserved it, and she went out in it. Did she say why? I asked her. Derek was looking at the floor. I asked her why she came up there. You know what she said? What? She said because nobody else was coming. Roland Pace put down his pen. That's the whole thing, Derek said. That's the entire thing right there. That's what I spent 9 months trying to find 9 holes in the ground to understand. She wasn't up there because she hated us. She was up there because somebody has to be up there and nobody else was, and she was the only one willing. And I have been standing on my own porch for 44 years telling myself I was that guy, and I wasn't. I was the other guy. I was the guy she was standing there for. He pled guilty on the 14th of February, felony criminal mischief, 4 counts of criminal trespass, 2 counts of unlawful take, restitution of $191,000, which was every dollar Claire Morgan had ever spent on that mountain, and then some calculated by Terrence Holloway himself over 11 nights with a calculator and his brother's books. Claire refused it. She sent a letter. One line printed the same as the first one she ever sent him. Put it toward the county search and rescue. Derek Holloway read that letter in a jail cell in Great Falls, and then he put his forehead against the wall and stayed there for a while. At the sentencing on the 22nd of April, the judge asked if anyone wished to speak, and a man nobody expected stood up in the back. Wade Pruitt. He was sober. He'd been sober since the 19th of December, 124 days, and he had a piece of paper in his hand that shook so bad he finally gave up and folded it. Your Honor, he said, I'm one of the guys. I ain't here to help him. I'm here because there's a thing that's got to get said in a room where it counts. Go ahead, Mr. Pruitt. Wade looked around that courtroom. I laid in the snow on that mountain and I quit, he said. I want everybody to hear that. I quit. I sat down and I was done, and I was 36 years old, and I was going to die because I couldn't see the ground. And that woman come out of the white and put her hands on my face and asked me my name. He stopped. She asked me my name, he said. Ma'am, sir, judge, that woman had 4 months of video of me. She knew my name. She knew my truck. She knew my birthday probably. She asked me my name because that's what you ask a man to find out if his brain's still working, and I need everybody in here to get this. He was crying and he did not stop or apologize for it. She had every single reason to leave me there, Wade said, and she give me her compass. Her compass, Your Honor, in a whiteout. She give away the only thing in her pack that could get her home, and then she went up the hill after him. The courtroom did not make a sound, and I asked her why, Wade said, and I said, he's got a rifle, ma'am. He's been talking about you for 4 months. He don't sleep, and she looked at me and said, I know. He sat down, then he stood back up. He's on my land, Wade said. That's what she told me. That's why she went. Because he was on her land. 9 months we spent trying to teach that woman whose land it was. And turns out she was the only one of us who ever believed it in the first place. And the day it cost her something, she went and got him. The judge gave Derek Holloway 36 months suspended with 1,100 hours of community service and restitution to search and rescue. And then the judge, who was 68 years old and had been on that bench for 22 years, said something not one person in the room ever forgot. He said, "Mr. Holloway, you're getting suspended time. And I want to be very clear with the gallery about why, because there's press here and they're going to get it wrong. It is not because a person came and got you off that mountain. That is not a legal fact, and it doesn't belong in my sentence." He took his glasses off. "I'm suspending your sentence," he said, "because you fired your lawyer and told the truth in a room where the truth cost you $191,000 and your name. And in 19 years, I have had exactly 4 men do that. And I'll tell you the other thing, and then I'll be done." Derek stood there. "You crossed that fence for 9 years," the judge said, "because you believed nobody was standing behind it. That's all it ever was. Not one thing about elk. You crossed because you'd tested that line your whole life and it always moved. And it turns out the only thing that was ever holding that line was whether somebody was willing to stand there and not move, and one woman was, and the entire architecture of your life fell down." He put his glasses back on. "Don't cross another one," he said. Claire Morgan was not in that courtroom. She was on her fence line. It was the 22nd of April and the frost was coming out of the ground, and that meant the posts on the west run were going to heave, and she was tamping them back one at a time alone, and she had no idea any of it was happening. Terrence Holloway drove up that evening and told her. She listened to the whole thing with a maul in her hand. Then she said, 36 months suspended. Yeah, he'll do the hours. Everyone he asked for search and rescue, they put him on it. Claire nodded slowly. That's good, she said. Terrence waited and waited. Claire, he said finally, that's it. What else is there? He stood up in a courtroom in front of the whole county and said your name for 2 hours. I know. Wade Pruitt got up in front of a judge and cried. I know. Then say something. Terrence's voice cracked and he was surprised by it. Please, say one thing. You won. Do you understand that you won the whole thing without ever raising your voice one time, and I have never seen anybody do that in my life, and you're standing there with a hammer talking about frost heave? Claire set the maul down. She looked at him for a while. Terrence, she said, can I tell you what I did on the 19th of December? You saved 2 men's lives. No. Her voice was very quiet. On the 19th of December at 11:20 in the morning, and I stood on my porch and I did arithmetic. 2 men, 1 of me. And I ran the numbers and the numbers said I could probably get 1. Terrence didn't move. And I went anyway, she said, and I got both. And I want you to understand something, and I want you to hear me because you're the only person I'm ever going to say this to. Okay, that's luck, Claire said. That's all that is. I did everything right, and I have done everything right before, and it did not matter. 12 years ago, I did everything right, and a man died on my back at 900 meters, and there was not one single thing I could have done differently. And I have gotten up at 3 in the morning every day since to go over it again, and it comes out the same every time. Her hands were shaking. Terrence saw it. He had never seen it before, and he never saw it again. So when you tell me I won, Claire said, what I hear is that the arithmetic went my way one time, and I'm glad I am. But I'm not going to stand out here and be a legend about it because I know exactly how thin that is. Terrence Holloway stood on a mountain in April and finally understood the woman. Claire, he said, can I ask you something? Yes. 12 years, 3 in the morning, every day. Yes. Was it better up here? And Claire Morgan looked out at 8.4 miles of fence, and the sun was going, and the whole valley was in that light that only comes about 11 days a year, and she said some mornings. 2 weeks later, Sheriff Daniel Carter got one more piece of it, and it was the last piece, and he never told anybody. He got a phone call from a man in Great Falls. Danny, Pete, that thing we didn't talk about. Daniel sat down slowly. Yeah, I'm not telling you anything. Understood. I want to ask you a question, Pete said. As a friend, did she go out in that storm? Yeah, on foot. 4 miles, whiteout. She gave the first one her compass and went up after the second one. There was a long silence. Pete, Danny, Pete said, and his voice was strange. You know why she got out? I figured she just did her time. She had 8 years in. She was the best they had at what she did, and I'm not saying what that was, and she walked. Why, Bimbo? Because they wouldn't let her go back for him. Daniel's mouth went dry. There was a man, Pete said. That's all I'll say. And she carried him out, and he was gone before she got to the wall. And the reason she carried him 900 meters, when she absolutely knew at 300, is that there was a policy. And the policy said in that situation, you leave. And she'd been told her whole career that the policy was correct. And she came home and she put in her papers 11 days later, Pete said. And the last thing she said to anybody in that building, and Danny, this is the only thing I'm ever going to tell you, so listen. The last thing she said was, I'm done working for people who decide where the line is from a room. Daniel Carter sat there with the phone against his ear. She bought a mountain, Pete said. Yeah, of course she did. Pete laughed, and it wasn't a happy sound. 700 acres and a fence all the way around it. Danny, do you understand what that woman was doing up there? I think I do. She wasn't hiding. No. She was drawing one, Pete said. For the first time in her life, she got to draw it herself and stand on it herself, and nobody in a room 3,000 miles away got a vote. He hung up. Daniel Carter sat in his office in Lodgepole, Montana for a long time. Then he got out the legal pad, the one that still had 4 positions. 5 men written at the top from a night in December when he hadn't slept, and he turned to a clean page and he wrote one line. He wrote, she never fired a shot. And then he underlined it twice and closed the pad and put it in a drawer, and he kept that legal pad for the rest of his career through 2 more elections in a knee replacement. And when he retired 11 years later, he took it home with him, and it is still in his desk, and his grandchildren have never asked what it means. On the 4th of June, a truck came up Claire Morgan's fire road. She was on the West Run. She heard it, and she did not stand up because she never did. It stopped at the gate, which was new, which she had hung herself in January, and a man got out. It was Marlon Reese. He stood at that gate for a full minute with his hands at his sides. Then he called out, "Ma'am." She stood up and looked at him. "Miss Morgan, my name's Marlon Reese." "I know who you are." "Yes, ma'am, I figured." He swallowed. "I'm the one that told the sheriff, and I'm the one that was up here in October. I did both of those things, and I ain't going to pretend the second one cancels the first one." "All right. I got 104 hours of community service left," Marlon said. "And I already asked the judge, and he said it's got to be for the county. It can't be for a private party, so this isn't that." "Then what is it?" Marlon Reese stood at the gate on a mountain and said the hardest sentence of his life. "I'd like to fix your fence," he said, "for free, on my own time. And I don't want anything, ma'am. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want you to say anything to me. I don't want you to forgive me. That's honest to God. That is not what this is. That 200 yards on the North Run, I helped pull that out of the ground with a chain, and I've had a thing in my chest since October, and I've been to a doctor about it, and there ain't nothing wrong with my heart." Claire Morgan looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You got gloves?" Marlon blinked. "Ma'am?" "Gloves in the truck." "Yes, ma'am." "Get them," Claire said, and she picked up the maul and turned back to the post. "The frost took 9 of these on this run, and I've got about 4 hours of light." Marlon Reese stood there for 2 seconds. Then he ran to his truck. They worked until dark, and they said maybe 40 words to each other the entire time, and 30 of them were about tension and post spacing, and when the light was gone, Marlon put his tools in his truck and stood there with his hat in his hands. "Same time tomorrow," he said, and Claire Morgan said 6. He came back for 11 weekends. Nobody in the county ever knew. Not Daniel, not Terrence, not Wade, not Derek. They worked on that fence through June and July and into August, and neither one of them ever told a living soul. And it stayed that way until Marlon Reese's funeral 14 years later, when a woman nobody in that church recognized sat in the back row and stayed for the whole thing and left before the last hymn. The 11th weekend was the 14th of August, and it was the last one, and neither of them knew that when it started. They finished the North Run at 4 in the afternoon. 240 yards of new wire on new posts, and Marlon Reese walked the whole length of it with his hand on the top strand, the way a man checks his own work when he doesn't trust himself yet. Then he came back and stood in front of here. "It's done," he said. "It's done. That's the last of what I tore out." "I know." Marlon took off his gloves and looked at them. "Ma'am, I don't know how to leave," he said. Claire wiped her hands on her jeans. "You put your tools in the truck and you drive down." "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean." He stood there. The mountain was quiet the way it had gotten quiet that summer, quiet in the way that only happens when things start coming back. "Can I say one thing?" Marlon said. "You've earned one." "My boy came out in July," Marlon's voice went careful. 3 days. And he asked me what I'd been doing, and I said, "I've been fixing a fence for a lady up on the mountain." And he said, "Why?" "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth." Marlon looked up. "I said because I broke it." Claire didn't say anything. "And he thought about that for a while," Marlon said. "And then he said, okay, that's it. Just okay." Like it was the most normal thing in the world. 9 years old. His mouth twisted. "Ma'am, I have spent 41 years explaining myself to people. 41 years. And that's the first time in my life anybody ever just said, okay. And it's because for once, I had a thing to say that didn't need explaining. That's how it works. Is it? Yes." Marlon Reese nodded and put his gloves in his back pocket. "You know what's funny?" he said. "What?" "I hate this fence," he laughed. "I do. I've spent 11 weekends and about 400 hours on this thing, and I've bled on it twice, and I hate it. And I'd fight anybody who touched it." Claire Morgan almost smiled. "Almost. That's the whole thing," she said. "That's what nobody understands about a fence." "What?" "Nobody loves it. It's wire and posts and a lot of work, and it doesn't do anything for you." She looked down the line. "You don't build one because you love it? You build one because on the other side of it, there's something you're not willing to lose, and this is the only way anybody's ever figured out to say so." Marlon Reese thought about that the whole way down the mountain, and he thought about it for 14 more years. He put a fence around his own place that fall. 11 acres outside Missoula, nothing a house and a shop and a yard, and his ex-wife asked him what in the world he was fencing, and he said nothing. That's the point. He got his boy back in stages. Not all at once. Nobody gets it all at once. First, it was 3 weekends a year, then it was 1 a month, then it was summers, and by the time that boy was 14, he was spending June through August in a house with a fence around it and a father who had not had a drink in 5 years and could not explain to anybody ever that the whole thing had started because he laid down in a hole on a mountain and understood he was somebody's weather. He never told his son about October. He told him about the fence. Derek Holloway did his 1,100 hours with Cascade County Search and Rescue. He was not good at it at first. That surprised everybody, including him. Derek Holloway had been the most competent man in that county for 20 years. He could run a crew, read a spreadsheet back, a trailer, put a bull down at 400 yards, and talk any bank in Montana into anything. He was terrible at search and rescue. The reason was simple, and it took him about 9 months to see it. "You're leading the team," captain told him in March, a woman named Denise Ochoa, who was 31 years old and had been doing it since she was 19. "You've been leading since the day you walked in here." "I'm trying to help." "I know you are. That's the problem." She handed him a coil of rope. "Derek, you keep getting out front. Every call out, every single one. And you're strong, and you're fast, and you're the first one to the subject, and you're useless when you get there." Derek went red. "Useless? You want me to lie to you?" "No." "Then you're useless." Denise sat down on the bumper. "Because when you get to a person who's been in a creek for 11 hours and they're gray and they can't talk, you start doing. You start moving them and calling out and fixing it. And what they need in that first minute is not fixing. Then what do they need? They need somebody to get down on their level and ask them their name." Derek Holloway stood in a parking lot in Great Falls with a coil of rope in his hands, and his whole face went strange. "What?" Denise said. "Nothing." "Derek." "Nothing." He walked away and stood behind the truck for a minute. Because he was 45 years old, and he had just found out that the thing he'd been dragging around in his chest for 15 months had a name. And the name was that a woman had done the thing right in front of him, and he'd been too far gone to see it. He got better after that, By the third year, he was on the call-out list for the hard ones. By the fifth, he was the guy they woke up at 2 in the morning when it was somebody's kid. And he never took a leadership position, not once, not ever, and Denise Ochoa offered it to him 4 times, and every time he said the same thing. I'm better in the back. His hours were done in 26 months. He stayed 19 years. Now here is the part that people in Lodgepole argue about to this day, and both sides are wrong. One side says Claire Morgan never spoke to Derek Holloway again. The other side says they became friends. The truth is that in 19 years, they spoke exactly 4 times, and Derek Holloway could tell you the date of every single one. The first was the 9th of November, 11 months after the storm. He drove up her fire road at 9 in the morning alone, and he stopped at the gate, and he did not honk. He got out and he stood there. She came down from the West Run about 20 minutes later. Mr. Holloway, ma'am. They looked at each other over a gate he had once torn out of the ground with a truck bumper. I'm not going to ask to come in, Derek said. Okay, I've got one thing to say, and then I'm going to go. And I'm not going to come back unless you tell me it's all right, and if you never tell me that, then this is the last time you'll see me. All right. Derek Holloway had rehearsed it for 11 months. He had it word for word. He'd written it down. He'd said it in the truck out loud 9 times on the way up. He got about 4 words in and it fell apart. I wanted to say and then his throat closed. Claire waited. He stood at that gate and he tried 3 more times and he could not do it. And finally, he just put his hands on the top rail and dropped his head and said the only thing that would come out. 9 years, he said. 9 years I came up this road and I never once thought about who lived here. Ray Vance was a man. He had a dog. And I never thought about him one time. And then you came, and I didn't think about you either. And the reason I couldn't stand you, ma'am, and I've had a long time to figure this out, the reason I couldn't stand you is you were the first person who ever made me have to. Claire didn't move. That's it, Derek said. That's the whole speech. I had a better one wrote down. He turned to go, and Claire Morgan said, Mr. Holloway. He stopped. That's the speech, she said. He got in his truck and he cried for 4 miles. The second time was 3 years later, and it wasn't a conversation. There was a call out on the 5th of March. A boy, 15 from Bozeman, out with his cousins on snowmobiles, and he'd gone off the trail on the Kessler side and been gone 11 hours. They ran that whole face for a day and a half. 40 people. Ooh, sexy day people. 2 dogs, nothing. And on the second night at about 9, Denise Ochoa was standing at the command truck looking at a map, and somebody said, ma'am. She turned around. There was a woman standing at the edge of the light. You're Ochoa. Yes. He's not on the Kessler side, Claire Morgan said. He's in the draw below the burn on the east face about 200 yards up from the creek. Denise stared at her. Who are you? Doesn't matter. Ma'am, we've had 40 people on this hill for 30 hours. I know. I've been watching them. Denise Ochoa said later that in 12 years of doing that job, she had never once had somebody walk out of the dark and tell her where a subject was. And she said the only reason she listened, the honest-to-God only reason, was that the woman didn't argue. She just said it and then stood there. Why the east face, Denise said. Because I've watched the wind on that mountain every day for 4 years. And at 4 in the afternoon on the 5th of March, the wind comes over that shoulder and it pushes everything into that draw. Claire's voice was flat. Snow sound animals, people. That draw catches everything. It always has. He's got a snowmobile. Sled tracks go west. He walked away from the sled. How do you know that? And Claire said because he's 15 and he was embarrassed. There were 9 seconds of silence at that command truck. Then Denise Ochoa said, Derek. He came around the truck. He saw her. He stopped dead. Derek, Denise said, take 4 and go to the east face below the burn in the draw, 200 up from the creek. He didn't ask a single question. They found that boy in 41 minutes. He was alive. He was 230 yards up from the creek, which is 30 yards off, and he'd walked away from the sled because he'd flipped it, and he thought his cousins would laugh at him. Derek Holloway got to him first. He got down on his knees in the snow, and he did not start doing, and he put his hand on that boy's chest and said, Hey, what's your name? And when the boy said it, Derek Holloway put his forehead down on that kid's shoulder for 1 second, and nobody on that team ever asked him why, and the woman who'd told them where to look was gone from the edge of the light before they got back to the trucks. That was the second time. The third time was 11 years in, and it was the shortest, and it was the one that broke him. His granddaughter was 4. They were at Earl Hutchins's hardware store on a Saturday in June, and Derek was buying staples, and the girl was hanging on the end of the aisle the way 4-year-olds do, and she wandered. He turned around and she was gone. 40 seconds. That's all it was. 40 seconds in a hardware store. But Derek Holloway had spent 11 years pulling people out of things, and 40 seconds put him through the floor, and he came around that end cap with his heart going and his hands cold, and he stopped. She was standing in the fencing aisle. A woman was crouched down in front of her, holding a roll of wire she'd taken out of the girl's hands before it could take a finger off and saying something quiet. Derek could not move. The woman stood up. "She's fine," Claire Morgan said. "She was going for the barbed." "I thank you, She's got your hands." Claire looked down at the girl. "What's your name?" And the little girl said Ruthie. Claire Morgan nodded once and handed him the roll of wire and walked to the counter and paid Earl for $400 of fence staples in cash and left. Derek Holloway stood in that aisle holding his granddaughter's hand. He got to the truck and he sat there. "Grandpa," Ruthie said, "you're crying." "Yeah." "Why?" And Derek Holloway said, "Because a nice lady asked you your name." So one time, he said, a long time ago, she asked me mine. The town changed, and nobody noticed it changing, which is how it always goes. The poaching stopped, not all at once. It stopped the way water stops running when the ground finally freezes a little at a time, and then completely, and by the 4th year, there was not one violation report filed on that entire drainage. The elk came back into the West Valley in the 6th year. Bill Tarrow was the one who saw them first from the county road, and he pulled over and sat there with his mouth open because Bill Tarrow was 80 by then, and he had not seen elk in that valley since he was a young man. He drove straight to the hardware store and told Earl. 40 of them, he said. 40, Earl, in the West Valley, standing there like they own it. Well, Earl said, that valley's been dead 30 years. Yep. Bill Tarrow sat down on his stool at the coffee counter, the same stool he had been sitting on the morning a woman walked in and started stacking fence, and he was quiet for a while. Earl, he said, yeah. Remember what I said about her? You said she wouldn't make it through winter. I did. Bill turned his coffee cup around. 22 years old, I said the same thing about my wife's cousin, and I've been wrong about people my whole life, and I never much cared. He looked up. This one bothers me. Earl Hutchins wiped the counter. Bill, he said, you want to know the thing that gets me? What? 20 years. She's been coming in this store 20 years, and she has never one time, not once, asked me for anything on credit, or asked me to hold something, or asked me to order something in special, or asked me for a discount, or asked me for one single favor. Not one, Basien. Earl shook his head. 20 years. That's just how she is. No, it isn't. Earl put the rag down. I asked her about it. You're 11 or 12. I said, Claire, you know you can run a tab like everybody else. You know what she said? What? She said if I owe you something, then you own a piece of my day. Bill Tarrow thought about that. That's a hell of a way to live, he said. Yeah, Earl said, but look at that valley. Sheriff Daniel Carter retired 11 years after the storm, and at his retirement dinner, which was at the Elkhorn, because there was nowhere else, a man from the state stood up and read a list of his accomplishments. And it took about 4 minutes, and Daniel sat there and did not hear a word of it. When it was his turn, he stood up with a beer in his hand. I got one story, he said, and it's not mine. The room got quiet because everybody in it knew which one. 19 years I did this job, Daniel said. And the thing I'm going to think about when I'm 80, sitting on my porch, is a phone call I got at 6:40 in the morning on the 18th of December. He looked at his beer. I've never told anybody what she said, and I'm not going to tell you the whole thing. But she said one line to me, and it's been in my head every single day since. And I've decided you all ought to have it because it's not mine either. I've just been holding it. The Elkhorn was silent. She said the line's only worth something if the person holding it is better than the people crossing it. He set the beer down. Otherwise, it's just a fight over dirt. Nobody clapped, not for a while. And then somebody did in the back, and it went around the room, and Daniel Carter sat down and put his hand over his eyes. Terrence Holloway was in the back of that room. And Terrence Holloway was the one who knew the other thing, and he had never told it, And he sat there through the whole dinner deciding whether he ever would. 12 years later, he did. It was the worst night of his life. His son, 26, had done something in Billings that could not be undone. And Terrence was sitting in a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning with his phone in his hand and no idea what a father does. And he called Wade Pruitt of all people because Wade Pruitt had been sober for 23 years by then and was the only person Terrence knew who had actually climbed out of anything. Wade came, 4 hours. He drove. They sat in that corridor, and at some point, Wade said, "No, Terrence, you got to tell me what you're thinking because you've been sitting there with your mouth shut for 2 hours." And Terrence Holloway said, "I'm thinking about something Claire Morgan told me in her kitchen in December of that year." "What did she tell you?" "I asked her to leave," Terrence said. "I begged her. I said, take a winter, go to Arizona, come back in April." And she said no. And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because I already left once." Wade Pruitt went very still. "I didn't understand it then," Terrence said. "I thought she meant the Navy. Took me 25 years to figure out she didn't mean she left a job." "What did she mean?" Terrence looked down the hallway at a door with his son behind it. "She meant that there's a thing that happens to you," he said, "when you're standing somewhere you're supposed to stand, and it gets bad and you go. And you can have every reason in the world. You can have orders. You can have the whole United States government telling you it was correct. And it doesn't matter, Wade, because at 3 in the morning for the rest of your life, you're going to be right back there." Wade didn't say anything. "She said you don't get to stop being the person who stands there," Terrence said. "You only get to choose whether you're standing anywhere." The corridor hummed. "So you're staying," Wade said. "I'm staying." Terrence's voice broke. "I don't know what to do, Wade. I don't know one thing to do. He did what he did, and I can't fix it, and I can't take it, and I've got nothing." "Terrence." "What?" Wade Pruitt leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor of that hospital for a long moment. "You don't got to do anything," he said. "That's the whole thing. That's what I've been trying to tell people for 23 years, and don't nobody get that. She didn't do anything to us. 9 months. She never yelled. She never shot. She never threatened. She never said one ugly word to any of us. She just would not move." He looked up. "You're his fence," Wade said. "That's it. That's the job. You sit in this hallway and you do not move. And it don't matter if he can see you, and it don't matter if he yells at you, and it don't matter if it takes 9 years." Terrence Holloway put his face in his hands. "And Terrence," Wade said quietly, "when it gets bad and there's going to come a day where the smart thing and the right thing are two different things and everybody's telling you to go, yeah, go get him." That boy came home in 11 months. He is 43 years old now, and he has 2 kids in a business, and he does not know that any of it turned on a conversation 2 men had in a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning about a woman on a mountain neither of them had spoken to in a decade. Claire Morgan lived on that mountain for 31 years. She never married. She never took a photograph off a wall because there were never any photographs. She got a dog in the 8th year, a blue heeler, and she called her Sadie, and when Daniel Carter found out about that, he had to leave the room. She walked the fence every morning, every single morning, 8.4 miles or a piece of it, 31 years in snow and mud and smoke, when the fires came in the 19th year, and she cut a line by hand for 2 days and saved the whole east face and never told anybody, and Fish and Wildlife figured it out from a satellite photo 4 months later. She never gave one interview. Not one. There were 9 requests in the first 3 years and 2 documentary crews, and a man from a network who flew to Great Falls and rented a car and drove all the way up her fire road, and she was on the West Run, and she looked at him, and he opened his mouth, and she said, "You're on my land." That was the entire interview. He wrote about it anyway. It was the best thing he ever wrote, and the whole piece is about a woman who said 4 words to him, and the last line of it is, "I have never in my life met anybody who wanted nothing." He was wrong about that. She wanted something. She wanted a place with a fence. The last time anybody in Cascade County had a real conversation with Claire Morgan was the 12th of October in her 31st year, and it was the 4th time she and Derek Holloway spoke, and he was 75, and she was 69, and they were both on search and rescue by then because she joined in the 14th year, and nobody in that county ever got over it. She walked into a training in Great Falls and put her name on a clipboard, and Denise Ochoa had looked at the name and looked up, and Claire Morgan had said, I hear you're short of people who can walk. 17 years, 209 call-outs. She never led one either. On the 12th of October, they were on a hasty search out past the Blackfoot Cut 168 cardiac, and they found him in the dark, and he was gone before they got there, and there was nothing anybody could have done. They sat on the tailgate afterward, the two of them, the only two left, because everybody else had gone down with the body. Nobody could have got there, Derek said. The call came in an hour late. I know. I'm saying it out loud because you're going to run it. Claire didn't answer. You're going to run it at 3 a.m, Derek said. For the rest of your life. I know because I've watched you do it for 17 years. Yes. Claire. He looked at his hands. Can I say something I've been holding 31 years? You can. That day in the storm. Okay. You did arithmetic, Derek said. On the porch, before you came out. You ran it and it said 1 and you came anyway. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Who told you that? Terrence, 20 years ago. He never should have. He was drunk one time in his whole life and that was the night. She didn't say anything. I want to ask you the question, Derek said, and I've earned it, and if I haven't, tell me, and I'll shut up and we'll sit here. Ask it. On the porch, when the numbers came out 1. Yes. Which one of us was it? The wind moved out past the Blackfoot Cut. Claire Morgan sat on a tailgate at 69 years old with her hands on her knees. Wade, she said. Derek Holloway nodded slowly. He'd known for 31 years. Because he was closer, he said. No. Derek looked up. Because he stopped, Claire said. Because he sat down in the snow and quit, and a man who quits you can find because he stays in one place. And you were going up. She looked out at the dark. You were going up Derek into it, and you were not going to stop, and there was no arithmetic in the world that got me to you. Then why'd you come? And Claire Morgan said the last thing she ever said about it to anybody alive or dead. Because I couldn't do it twice, she said. Derek Holloway sat there. 12 years before you, Claire said, I did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was right, and I did everything correctly, and a man I loved died on my back at 900 meters. And I have spent every morning since at 3 o'clock going through it, and it always comes out the same. And there is not one thing I would change, and it does not help. Not one bit. Being right does not help Derek. Nobody tells you that. Claire. So when I stood on that porch and the number said 1, she said, I understood something that I'd been 11 years getting to, and it's the only thing I know that's worth anything. What? The arithmetic isn't the job, Claire Morgan said. The arithmetic tells you what's likely. It doesn't tell you who you are. And there is exactly one thing in this world that a person actually gets to decide, and it's not how it comes out. It's whether they went. Derek Holloway put his hand over his mouth. I wasn't up there to save you, she said. I want that clear. I have never once in my life been able to promise anybody I could save them. I was up there because you were on my land, and if I sit in a warm cabin 14 miles away and let a mountain take a man off ground I put my name on, then the fence doesn't mean anything and the signs don't mean anything, and every hour of 9 months I spent not shooting you was a lie. She stood up off the tailgate. The line's only worth something, she said, if the person holding it is better than the people crossing it. And if you'd only got one, Derek said, if it'd been Wade in that cabin and me still up there in the morning. Claire Morgan stopped. And for the first and only time in 31 years, Derek Holloway saw her face do something. Then I'd have gone back out at first light, she said, and I'd have found you, and I'd have carried you down, and I'd have put you in the back of a truck, and I would have walked my fence the next morning at 6 o'clock like I have every morning of my life. That's it. Derek, her voice was very quiet. That's all there's ever been. That's the whole thing. Everybody wants there to be more. She died in the 32nd year in her own bed in her own cabin in February with the stove going and a dog on the floor, and she was 69 years old, and nobody found her for 9 days, because that is what happens when you live 14 miles from the nearest person, and you never once in 3 decades called anybody for help. Marlon Reese found her. He was 72, and he'd been driving up that fire road 1 weekend a month for 31 years, and nobody in that county had ever known. He walked the fence first. He didn't know why. He said afterward he just couldn't go to the door. 8.4 miles. Every post. It took him 5 hours, and it was February, and he was 72 years old, and he walked the entire thing before he would let himself Go up on that porch. It was tight, all of it, every foot. 69 years old and every foot of it was tight. Marlon Reese sat down in the snow at the northeast corner, braced the one she'd built the first week she ever set foot on that mountain. The one Daniel Carter had looked at from his truck in September of that first year and thought was built like it was meant to hold up a bridge. And he put his hand on it and he said out loud to 8.4 miles of wire, "Ma'am, I'm going to go in now." The will was one page. 700 acres to the state of Montana in trust in perpetuity as a wildlife conservation area with three conditions. The first condition was that the fence be maintained. The second condition was that it never be named after her. The third condition was one line, and the lawyer in Great Falls who read it out loud to a room containing Derek Holloway, Wade Pruitt, Marlon Reese, Terrence Holloway, and a retired sheriff named Daniel Carter said he had never seen anything like it in 40 years of practice. The third condition was the sign stay up. Nobody said a word for about 11 seconds. Then Wade Pruitt, 71 years old and sober for 32 of them, started laughing. And then he was crying, and then all 5 of those men were sitting in a lawyer's office in Great Falls with their faces in their hands. Because they got it, all of them, instantly. Not one of them needed it explained. The state took the land. They put in a trailhead 9 years later in a small parking area and a kiosk. And there was a laminated card on that kiosk that gives the acreage and the elevation and the species you might see, and it does not say her name because that was the deal. And every 400 yards, along 8.4 miles of boundary, there is a sign. They're new signs. The state replaces them. They're aluminum now. They say exactly what the old ones said. Private property. No trespassing. All violations documented, which is not true anymore. It's public land. It hasn't been private property in a long time. Fish and Wildlife tried to change them in the 4th year. Sent a memo, said the language was legally inaccurate and confusing to the public, and proposed replacing them with standard conservation area signage. They got 240 letters, 240, from a county with 410 people in it. The signs stayed, and there are people who hike that boundary now. Young people, people who were not born when any of this happened, and they see those signs and they think it's a mistake or a joke or that somebody forgot. And every once in a while, one of them will stop at the Elkhorn on the way out or the hardware store and ask, and somebody in there will be old enough. The last thing is this, and it's the only part of the story that Claire Morgan herself would have allowed anybody to tell. In the 4th summer after she died, a boy of 9 came up that trail with his mother, and he stopped at one of those signs and read it out loud, and he said, "Mom, that's wrong. Nobody owns this." And an old man on the trail behind them, who had 2 DUIs when he was young, and 36 years of sobriety when he was old, stopped and took his hat off. "Son," Wade Pruitt said, "everything belongs to somebody. They just have to decide where the line is." The boy looked at him. "Who decided this one?" he said. And Wade Pruitt looked up at 8.4 miles of fence that had not moved 1 inch in 40 years. "A woman," he said. "She lived up here by herself. Everybody in this valley thought she was weak because she never raised her voice. 5 men crossed that fence to prove it." "What happened to them?" Wade Pruitt put his hat back on. 2 of them died out there, he said, and it was true because Cole Beckett drank himself into the ground in Bozeman at 41, and Derek Holloway was gone by then too. 80 years old in his sleep in a bed, his granddaughter Ruthie sat beside for the last 6 days. And 3 of us came back. And every one of the 3 came back different, and not one of us came back because she beat us. Then why? Because she came and got us. And Wade Pruitt walked down that trail with his hand on the wire the way he had learned to do in the dark on the worst night of his life, and he did not take it off for 400 yards. That is what happened on that mountain. A woman bought 700 acres because she wanted to be quiet, and men crossed her fence for 9 months to make her prove she wasn't, and she never fired a shot, and she never raised her voice, and she never explained herself to one living soul. And when the worst day came, she walked 4 miles into a whiteout and carried the man who hated her most down off her own land on her own back. She did not win because she was dangerous. She won because she did not move. And every person who ever crossed that fence learned the same thing in the same order, and it took some of them 30 years. Silence is not weakness. It is a decision made so completely that it does not need to be announced. A line on a map is nothing. A line is only real when somebody is standing on it who will not step back. Claire Morgan stood on hers for 32 years, and she never hurt a single human being to do it. And the fence is still up, and the signs are still there, and the elk are still in the West Valley. That is the whole thing. Everybody wants there to be more.